Hey guys, tonight we journey back in time to the frozen shores of Scandinavia. Imagine yourself standing on the edge of the icy landscape, the cold air biting your skin, and the sound of crashing waves in the distance. It's a world unknown, full of mystery, and you're about to join a band of fierce explorers, armed with courage and a thirst for adventure. You're about to set sail, though if you're honest with yourself, you probably won't survive this. But hey, it's all part of the Viking spirit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. I'm always curious to hear. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Vikings, those legendary seafarers from the north, were driven by something more than just the desire for riches or conquest. There was an insatiable curiosity that pushed them to the edges of the known world, seeking new lands and untold wonders. For centuries, the people of Scandinavia had only known their rugged homeland and the lands to the south that they occasionally raided. But their dreams reached far beyond. They looked to the west, beyond the horizon, where the sun dipped into unknown waters. This was a world untouched, a blank slate for the taking. But why? What drove them to cast off into these uncharted seas? Historians still argue whether it was the promise of wealth or the burning desire to explore the unknown that spurred the Vikings to leave behind their homes and families. Some suggest that it was simply a need to find more land, a hunger for space as their population grew. Others think it was the lure of glory, or perhaps even the pull of Norse mythology, with its tales of lands waiting to be discovered by the bravest of warriors. After all, the gods of the Vikings were not just distant, powerful beings, but intimately involved in their lives, guiding them through every storm and every challenge. As you embark on this journey with them, you can almost feel the weight of Odin's gaze, watching over you. Imagine that first moment when they set sail, their ships cutting through the cold waters, leaving everything familiar behind. The Vikings weren't just sailing for survival or simple exploration. They were sailing for something far grander, driven by the belief that they were meant to find the ends of the world. You're with them now, bound for places no one has ever seen, places that would one day be known as Vinland. Yet all you know for sure is that you are heading into the unknown. The winds that carried them away were fierce and unpredictable, much like the Norse gods themselves. Every gust could mean salvation or doom, and you, as one of these brave souls, know that survival isn't guaranteed. But there's no turning back. The allure of the unknown is too great. As the ship sways gently with the rhythm of the waves, you feel the wind in your hair and a quiet excitement stir within you. The journey has begun. There's no turning back now, only the distant horizon ahead of you, where the promise of new lands lies waiting. The longship, a marvel of Viking craftsmanship, creaks as the sail fills with wind, propelling you toward a world unseen. But why did they venture so far, and what was it that called to them from beyond the known world? You hear the murmurs of the crew around you, their voices low and serious. They speak of lands rich with resources, places where the earth is fertile and the sun shines longer than in their cold homeland. But more than that, there are legends, ancient stories passed down through generations. The Norse sagas tell of a land to the west, a place known only as Vinland. Some say it's a paradise, a lush land of abundance, a new home where the Vikings could settle and flourish. Others whisper that it is a place of mystery, where the seas are fraught with danger and the unknown looms just out of reach. Historians still debate whether Vinland was a real place or a legend, born from the imagination of those desperate for something beyond their rugged Scandinavian lands. Some believe the Vikings reached what is now Newfoundland, Canada, while others argue that they may have ventured even farther down the coast of North America. But the fact remains that, driven by both myth and opportunity, the Vikings set out to find this mysterious land, and in doing so, they shaped the course of history in ways that still echo today. But as you drift further from your homeland, you start to realize that this journey is more than just about discovering new lands. It's about something deeper, something in the very blood of these seafarers. The Vikings were more than just explorers. They were conquerors, adventurers, and traders, all rolled into one. Their ships were as much a symbol of their identity as their swords. With their long, sleek vessels, they could travel further and faster than any of their contemporaries. These ships, called longships, were designed for both speed and versatility, allowing them to navigate the open ocean as easily as they could explore rivers and shallow coasts. Every member of the crew is aware that these ships aren't just a means of transport, they're a lifeline, a tool that could make the difference between life and death. The longship is the ultimate Viking creation, crafted to perfection by skilled shipbuilders who had mastered the art of constructing vessels that could withstand the harshest conditions. As you look around at the dark, wet planks of the ship, you realize how closely tied you are to this vessel. The wind, the water, the sea spray, these will be your companions for many months to come. And with the ship's ability to travel up rivers and even beach themselves on distant shores, you're prepared for the challenges that lie ahead. It's not just the ship that carries you, though. The gods themselves seem to watch over the journey. As you look up at the sky, you can almost feel the presence of Odin, the All-Father, whose influence stretches far and wide. The Vikings had a deep belief in their gods, and many of them saw their journeys as ordained by these higher powers. The Norse gods were both fearsome and protective, guiding the sailors with their strength and wisdom. And as you sail further into the unknown, it becomes clear that you're not just following the wind, you're following a divine path, one that could lead you to glory or doom. But there's also a sense of freedom that comes with the journey. The idea of exploration was deeply ingrained in Viking culture. It wasn't just about finding new lands, it was about testing one's limits, proving one's worth, and staking a claim in a world full of possibilities. There was no greater test of courage and resilience than crossing the vast ocean and facing the unknown head-on. You know that, in this moment, you are living out the very ideals of the Viking spirit. Of course, as much as the promise of discovery beckons, you can't shake the reality that the journey isn't without risks. The seas are treacherous, and the weather unpredictable. Some ships, even with their incredible craftsmanship, would be lost in storms that no one could have foreseen. Still, the lure of new horizons is too strong to resist, and the thrill of adventure outweighs the dangers. In fact, some of the crew seem almost eager for the challenge, as if they crave the very chaos that could come with encountering the unknown. And then, as the journey drags on, you begin to feel the isolation. It's easy to romanticize this adventure from the safety of your own home, but now, in the middle of the sea, the reality of the expedition sinks in. It's not just the long days at sea, the never-ending horizon, or the uncertainty of what's ahead. It's the absence of the familiar. You can't see your homeland anymore, and the distant world around you feels strange, almost otherworldly. The silence, broken only by the sound of the waves and the creaking of the ship, is almost deafening. The crew murmurs, but there's a sense of quiet, of waiting for something to happen. But despite the uncertainty, you press on. After all, there's nothing else to do. The journey must continue, even if you can't quite imagine what's waiting on the other side. It's this sense of perseverance, of pushing forward against all odds, that defines the Viking spirit. The Vikings were not just warriors, they were dreamers, adventurers, and explorers. And now, as you stand on the deck of this ship, gazing into the endless expanse of the sea, you realize that you are part of that legacy. You are on the brink of a discovery that will shape history. As the days blend into one another and the waves seem to stretch endlessly in every direction, you feel the tension in the air. The Vikings aren't known for their patience, and the days at sea are beginning to wear on them. The quiet murmurs of the crew shift into anxious chatter, and you start to wonder, is this journey truly worth the price of isolation, of endless waves and wind? The thoughts cross your mind, but there's also something that pushes you forward. It's not just the promise of land, it's something deeper, something embedded in the very fabric of Viking culture. You remember the stories you heard as a child, the legends of the gods who watched over you, guiding the Vikings with their strength and their wisdom. Norse mythology is not just a collection of tales, but a framework that shapes everything a Viking does. The gods, from Odin to Thor to Freya, are present in every aspect of Viking life. And as you sail further into uncharted waters, you can almost feel their eyes on you. They are guiding your ship through the rough seas, watching over your every move. You can imagine Odin's one-eyed gaze, piercing through the mist, offering you his protection. Thor's hammer is there too, a symbol of strength in the face of adversity. And Freya, the goddess of love and war, is beside you, urging you to push forward, to fight for glory. Historians still argue over how much influence mythology actually had on Viking exploration. Some believe it was the stories themselves that gave Vikings the courage to embark on such perilous journeys, while others argue that it was the practical need for more land that drove them. But one thing is certain, the gods were always there, in the background, helping to shape the fate of these explorers. Every wave that crashes against the ship seems to speak of their power, and every gust of wind feels like a divine push forward. Still, even with these divine influences, the unknown is terrifying. You know that there are no guarantees. The Vikings weren't just explorers, they were warriors, accustomed to battling the elements as much as they battled other men. As the days pass, you start to understand that this journey is more than just about discovering a new land. It's about proving yourself, about surviving the challenges that nature throws at you and your crew. But it's not all about battle and conquest. As you move through the rough waters, you start to feel a sense of awe for the sea itself. The Vikings' relationship with the ocean was one of deep respect. The sea, with all its dangers, was also a source of life, a way for them to connect with distant lands and peoples. Without it, they would never have reached the shores of Britain, Ireland, or even the Mediterranean. But the ocean is as unpredictable as it is vast. You know that the further you go, the more perilous the journey becomes. The crew is starting to feel the strain of being so far from home, and the promise of a new world is beginning to feel more like a distant dream than a concrete reality. The sun sets each night, casting a fiery glow over the horizon, but the days continue to blur. It's easy to lose track of time, easy to feel like you're stuck in a world of water and sky, with no clear sense of direction. But in the distance, something begins to change. The sea, which had been so endless, now seems to shift. The water grows warmer, the winds calmer, and the horizon is no longer just a vague line in the distance. It's a solid shape, an outline of land that you've been longing for. The crew stirs, whispers traveling between the men. Is this the land they've been searching for? The one they've heard about in their sagas, the land of Vinland, a place of fertile soil and plenty? You can feel the excitement building, the hope returning. There's something electric in the air, a sense of possibility that's been absent since you left your homeland. The land isn't just a place, it's a symbol of everything the Vikings strive for: new beginnings, new opportunities, and a chance to carve out a legacy in a world that's waiting to be shaped. But even as the crew prepares to disembark, there's a sense of caution. The Vikings were never a people to rush into things blindly. They were calculated, strategic, and always aware of the risks involved. So, despite the excitement, there's still a sense of unease. What awaits them on this strange land? Will it be the paradise they've been promised, or something far darker? The stories told by the elders are full of wonder, but they're also full of danger. There are rumors of fierce creatures, hostile tribes, and a land that can be as unforgiving as the sea itself. And yet, despite the uncertainty, you know that this is the moment that the Vikings live for. This is the moment that will define everything. You are on the cusp of something momentous. The land may not yet be familiar, but the thrill of discovery is enough to push any doubts aside. You will set foot on this land, and whatever it holds, you will face it with the courage and determination that only a Viking can possess. The longship slowly cuts through the calm waters, the crew's anticipation palpable. You stand at the prow, squinting into the horizon, where the land is finally becoming clearer, distinct shapes rising from the sea. You know that soon, very soon, you'll set foot on new soil. The thrill of discovery hums in your veins like the sound of the oars working in unison. This is the moment that all the hardship has led to, the reward for your courage, your faith in the journey. As the ship draws closer to the shore, you can make out the details of the land: rolling hills, forests that stretch to the sky, and the rugged coastline. This is Vinland, the promised land, the place that legends spoke of. The crew erupts in a mix of cheering and muttering, their excitement growing with every passing second. But even as the land beckons, there's a moment of silence. You can feel it, the weight of history settling over the crew. This is the beginning of something grand, something that will echo through the centuries. Still, despite the excitement, you can't shake the lingering sense of uncertainty. This is uncharted territory, and the Vikings were never ones to take things lightly. There's the possibility of conflict with the native peoples, unfamiliar threats in the form of wildlife, and the ever-present challenge of surviving in a harsh, foreign environment. Even as the shore draws nearer, you understand that this journey is far from over. In fact, it's just beginning. You have heard stories of the native peoples who inhabit these lands, strange, powerful individuals who live in harmony with the land and sea. The Vikings were not strangers to conflict, but they also knew the value of trade and alliances. The first encounters would set the tone for everything that followed. Would the natives welcome you, or would they see you as invaders, bringing conflict and chaos to their world? No one knows, but the crew is ready for whatever may come. The sense of adventure is all-consuming, and the possibility of a new world, of new allies and opportunities, outweighs the risks. The ship draws even closer to the shore, and now you can see the dense forests lining the coast. The air smells fresh, earthy, and full of potential. The ship's crew members scramble into action, preparing to make landfall. You can feel your heart pounding as you secure your gear. This is the moment when everything changes, when the old world is left behind and the new one begins. The sense of the unknown still lingers, but it's not fear. It's the raw excitement of a world yet to be explored, a world that's about to reveal its secrets to those brave enough to claim it. As the longship glides up onto the beach, the crew disembarks, their boots crunching on the sand, their swords at their sides, ready for whatever comes next. You follow, stepping onto the unfamiliar land, your feet sinking slightly into the soft earth. It's strange, this feeling of standing on land that isn't home. There's a deep sense of disconnect, but also a rush of adrenaline as you take your first steps. The air is different here, colder, fresher, and the smells of the forest and sea fill your senses. It's a new world, but it's also one that feels familiar in its wildness. The first few days are filled with exploration and observation. The Vikings, ever the pragmatists, quickly begin assessing the land's potential. There are rivers to navigate, forests to explore, and mountains in the distance. But even as you begin to map out your new surroundings, something doesn't sit quite right. There are signs of life here, footprints in the sand, distant voices carried by the wind, and strange markings on the trees. The natives are here, and while the crew moves cautiously, there's no denying the tension that fills the air. The question remains, will the Vikings be able to coexist with these new peoples, or will the land's promise of riches and new beginnings become tainted by conflict? As you travel deeper into the forest, the land seems to grow more mysterious. The towering trees, thick with moss, create a canopy that filters the light into a green haze. It's a far cry from the rugged, sparse beauty of Scandinavia. Here, the land is alive with color, full of life and energy. You catch sight of strange animals, some of them large, with fur that you've never seen before, and others that scurry away in the shadows. The air is thick with the sounds of birds and insects, a cacophony of life that makes you feel like an intruder. You realize how much the Vikings, despite their fierce reputation, are at the mercy of nature here. They've conquered many lands, but this place, with its untamed wilderness, feels different. But even amidst the beauty and the mystery, there is the ever-present drive of the Viking spirit, survival, dominance, and legacy. The Vikings have never shied away from challenges, and this new land is no different. They will claim it, conquer it, and make it their own, just as they've done with countless other lands before. But whether the land will accept them, and whether they will be able to truly make it their own, is yet to be seen. The question looms, will Vinland be the paradise the Vikings hope for, or will it prove to be a place of danger and defeat? Whatever happens, one thing is certain, the journey has only just begun, and there are many more trials ahead. But for now, you stand on this foreign soil, looking out at the vast wilderness before you. You've made it this far, and the world around you feels wide open, full of possibilities and challenges alike. You stand there, at the edge of this new world, feeling the weight of everything that has led to this moment. The ship behind you, now anchored, is a symbol of your past, a lifeline that brought you here. But now, it's the land before you that commands your attention. The forest stretches out endlessly, as far as you can see, and the scent of damp earth and pine fills your senses. You're standing in the land of Vinland, a place that has been dreamed of for generations, a place that was once only myth. But now, it's real, and you're here. Leif Erikson, your leader and captain, stands beside you. His expression is calm but resolute, a man who has led his crew across vast oceans, braved unknown dangers, and fought battles. Yet now, as he gazes out at the land, there's a subtle unease about him, an awareness of the unknown dangers that lie just beyond the trees. As much as the Vikings have the spirit of conquerors, they are not immune to the fear that the wild can instill in a person. Vinland is beautiful, no doubt, but it's not a place to be taken lightly. The forest is thick, untamed, and teeming with life. The ground beneath your feet is soft, lush with undergrowth that seems to swallow any signs of human presence. There are no roads here, no settlements, no signs of civilization, save for the distant footprint in the sand. The air feels heavy with the promise of discovery, but you know that it's also heavy with uncertainty. The first task is to secure a place to settle, to build a base camp, and to begin the work of making this land livable. The Vikings have never been afraid of hard labor. They are builders, warriors, and farmers, and they will turn this wild land into a thriving settlement. But even as they begin to work, there's a sense of urgency. Time is against them. Winter will come soon, and it's a harsh season in these northern lands. The crew begins clearing the forest, building simple structures that can withstand the cold and provide shelter from the elements. There's no time to waste. You're part of the crew, working with the others to chop wood, gather food, and create the foundations of a future here. The days pass quickly as you work tirelessly, your muscles aching, but your resolve strengthening with each passing hour. The Vikings are nothing if not determined, and there's a sense of camaraderie that forms among the crew as you all pitch in to make this new life possible. You can feel the sweat on your brow, the sting of the axe in your hand, and the satisfaction that comes with building something from nothing. But even as you toil, your mind keeps returning to the question of the native peoples. Where are they? The stories of the Norse have long spoken of encounters with the indigenous peoples of the lands they discovered. But what would those encounters look like here? Would they welcome you, or would they see you as intruders, much like the Vikings once saw the monks and settlers of the lands they raided? You hear rumors of strange figures watching from the edge of the forest, fleeting glimpses of movement just beyond the trees. You try to reassure yourself that it's nothing more than the wind or the shadows, but the feeling of being watched lingers, unsettling. And then on the third day, you make the first contact. It's not a grand encounter, not a battle or a confrontation, but it's enough to stir the crew into a mix of excitement and caution. A group of native peoples, tall, dark-skinned, and dressed in furs, emerges from the trees, moving silently but with purpose. They don't attack, but they don't offer a greeting either. They watch from a distance, sizing you up, their eyes sharp and calculating. For a moment, there's a standstill. The Vikings, armed and ready, hold their ground. You can feel the tension crackling in the air, thick and heavy. But Leif, ever the leader, steps forward, his hand raised in peace. There's a silent communication between him and the native leader, who mirrors the gesture. It's not much, just a gesture of acknowledgement, a sign that neither side intends to make the first move. But it's enough. This first encounter is brief, but it's significant. The Vikings, who have seen the world as a place to conquer, are now facing a new reality. The world is not empty. There are others here, and they are not like the people the Vikings have met before. These are not the soft, defenseless monks of England or the sedentary farmers of Ireland. These are people of the land, people who know its rhythms and secrets, and they will not be easily pushed aside. In the days that follow, the crew watches with wariness, and the natives watch with curiosity. There are no violent clashes, no outright battles, but there are moments of tension. The Vikings are keenly aware of the differences between them and the native peoples, and there are whispers among the crew about the possibility of trade. Could there be an exchange of goods? Would the natives be willing to share the knowledge of the land in exchange for the Vikings' iron and weapons? The possibilities seem endless, but so do the risks. What happens next will determine whether this strange new world can be shared or whether it will become the battleground for two very different cultures. The Vikings have a long history of taking what they want by force, but this is different. This land, with its endless forests and rocky coastlines, is not theirs by birthright. It is theirs only because they've sailed to it, fought for it, and survived to claim it. Whether the land will allow them to stay is another question entirely. But for now, the land is still yours, and the future is wide open. With every axe strike, every nail hammered into place, you're building not just a settlement, but a legacy. A new chapter is unfolding, and the Vikings, with their indomitable spirit, are ready to face whatever comes next. The days stretch into weeks, and the rhythm of life in Vinland begins to settle. The longship, now anchored on the shore, feels like a distant memory, almost like a relic from another world. The crew, once restless with the excitement of discovery, has shifted into the mundane but necessary work of survival. The settlement takes shape, with crude huts and structures emerging from the wilds, but the underlying tension with the natives remains, an unspoken presence that lingers in the background. The Vikings are hard at work, their axes cutting through the thick forest, building the foundations for a future in this new world. The land is fertile, full of timber, fish, and wildlife. The river nearby promises easy transportation, and there is plenty of game to hunt. The air smells of wood and earth, a stark contrast to the salty, windswept shores of Scandinavia. Yet, despite the abundance, there's something about the land that doesn't feel entirely welcoming. You begin to notice the oddness of the forest. It's dense, thick with towering trees that block out much of the light. The earth feels soft beneath your boots, moss and ferns carpet the ground, and the shadows seem to linger a little longer than they should. It's a place full of life, but it's also full of mystery. There's a sense that the land itself might be hiding secrets, that there are things in these woods that the Vikings have never encountered before. Historians still argue about how much the Vikings truly understood the land when they arrived. Some believe they saw it as an Eden, a new world full of riches waiting to be claimed. Others think that the harsh realities of life in Vinland might have dampened their enthusiasm. Even as the Vikings worked to establish their settlement, there were signs that the land was not as easy to tame as they had hoped. The trees were thick and the terrain uneven, making agriculture difficult. The winters would be long and harsh, and there was always the risk of the natives becoming hostile, especially if the Vikings were seen as invaders rather than fellow travelers. You're part of the effort to gather food and supplies, your hands calloused from days of work. The hunting is fruitful. There are plenty of game animals like deer, rabbits, and wild boar in the surrounding forest. The river offers fish, and the seas provide more than enough for the crew to eat. But there's always a feeling of unease. The sight of the native peoples is becoming more common, and while there's still a tenuous peace between the two groups, it's clear that the land isn't big enough for both sides to coexist without conflict. The natives, too, seem to have a different relationship with the land. You watch them, how they move through the forest like shadows, navigating the terrain with ease. They don't clear the trees or build large structures. They live in harmony with the land, taking only what they need, and their knowledge of the forest is impressive. They seem to be waiting, watching the Vikings, as if they are trying to understand whether the newcomers will respect the land or strip it bare. One day, while hunting in the woods, you come across a small group of natives. This time, there's no tension in the air, just a quiet, curious silence. They watch you from a distance, their eyes steady, their expressions unreadable. You are struck by how much they seem at ease in the woods, how much they belong here, and you can't help but feel like an outsider. The forest is theirs, and the Vikings, despite their strength and determination, are merely visitors. There's a quiet moment between you and the native leader. No words are exchanged, but there's an understanding in the silence. The leader is tall, his features sharp, his eyes full of knowledge that seems beyond your years. He gestures toward the forest, then to the settlement, as if weighing the balance between two worlds. For a moment, you wonder whether the Vikings will be able to find a place in this land, or whether they will eventually be driven out, just like so many other invaders before them. As the weeks pass, the Vikings continue their work. The settlement grows, and the crew becomes more comfortable with the land. They build homes, set up farms, and even begin to forge tools and weapons from the materials they find. There's a sense of accomplishment in their work, but also a deep uncertainty. The thought of winter looms large. How long could they survive in this foreign land without enough resources? Could they endure the harsh northern winters? Could they coexist with the natives? Or would conflict break out? You begin to hear rumors among the crew. Some speak of the land's abundance, of the potential riches that could be found here. Others, however, speak of strange occurrences, animals acting out of character, odd noises in the night, and sightings of figures in the forest. No one is certain what to make of it, but there's a sense that something is watching them. You can't help but wonder if it's the land itself, a force that is indifferent to the Vikings' ambitions. Or perhaps it's the native peoples, whose quiet presence in the forest speaks of a watchful caution. The Vikings are used to battling enemies they can see, enemies that they can fight with sword and shield. But here, in this new world, the challenges are different. The land itself, with its strange rhythms and hidden dangers, might prove to be their greatest adversary. The native peoples, though silent and elusive, are a constant reminder that the world the Vikings have come to conquer is not theirs by right. It is a world that will either accept them or push them out. Despite the uncertainty, the Viking spirit endures. The crew remains focused on their goal, to build a new home in this strange and unfamiliar land. There's no turning back now. The sea that once brought you here now feels like a distant memory. You've crossed that boundary, and now you're part of this world. You will make your mark, or the land will swallow you whole. Only time will tell. The summer passes quickly, and the air begins to take on a chill. The trees, once green and full of life, start to change, their leaves turning gold and orange, a sign of the inevitable arrival of winter. The crew works feverishly, knowing that the harsh northern winter is not to be taken lightly. They gather firewood, reinforce their shelters, and set traps to ensure that they have enough food to survive the coming cold months. There is an urgency in their work now, a sense of looming dread that grows with every passing day. You, too, feel the pressure. It's different here, in Vinland. The winters are long, the nights cold and dark, and the land, no matter how rich it may seem, is not easily tamed. There's something about this land that feels both alien and familiar, like a place that has always existed, untouched, waiting for the Vikings to try and claim it. But you know that this land will never truly be theirs. It will bend to their will for a time, but it will never be entirely tamed. The crew has grown accustomed to the rhythms of the land, and yet there's still that undercurrent of tension. The native peoples, who had once been distant figures in the forest, have become more visible as the weather changes. Their presence is no longer something to ignore. Some say they are watching, others believe they are waiting. There are those in the crew who believe that the natives are curious about what the Vikings are doing, while others feel that their tolerance is growing thin. You can't ignore the reality of the situation. The Vikings are strangers here, and this land has its own set of rules. You hear stories of other Viking settlements that have failed, swallowed by the wilderness, torn apart by conflict. You wonder if the same fate awaits your group. The tension between the two peoples is becoming more palpable by the day. The Vikings are not accustomed to being watched, not used to their every move being observed by those who call this land home. There is a sense that something is about to break, though you can't tell what it is yet. The long nights seem to stretch on endlessly as the temperature drops. The first frost arrives earlier than expected, coating the ground in a thin layer of ice. The forest, once alive with sounds of birds and animals, now feels eerily silent. The Vikings huddle in their shelters, their breath visible in the cold air. The fires crackle in the center of the settlement, offering warmth and comfort, but they can't keep out the cold entirely. It's during these long nights that the rumors begin. Whispers spread among the crew about strange things happening around the settlement. Animals behaving oddly, figures moving in the shadows of the trees, strange sounds drifting through the night air. No one is sure what to make of it. Some dismiss it as the result of too many days in the wilderness, but others feel uneasy, as if the land itself is speaking to them in ways they can't fully understand. One night, as you sit by the fire, you hear something. Soft at first, a faint rustling in the trees. It's not an animal, you can tell that much. It's too deliberate, too controlled. Your heart races, and you find yourself standing up, straining to see through the darkness. There's nothing. The trees sway in the wind, but the sound has stopped. It could have been nothing, a figment of your imagination. Yet, as the nights grow colder and longer, that uneasy feeling gnaws at you. There's something about this place, something you can't quite put your finger on. The next day, while out gathering wood with a few of the crew, you catch a glimpse of something strange. A small figure, moving silently through the trees. You're not sure if it's one of the natives or something else entirely, but it disappears into the woods before you can make sense of it. It's the first of many sightings. Each time, the figure vanishes before you can get a good look, but the sense of being watched is growing stronger. You try to ignore it. After all, it could be a trick of the light, the forest playing its usual tricks on the mind. But there's a growing sense that something is not right. The Vikings are used to being the ones who control their environment, the ones who impose their will on the land. But here in Vinland, the land seems to be pushing back, resisting in ways the Vikings don't fully understand. The crew, despite their outward bravado, begins to show signs of strain. The isolation is starting to wear on them, the unknowns piling up with every passing day. There's a quiet anxiety that has settled over the settlement. The natives, too, seem to be acting differently. They are seen more frequently, standing on the edges of the settlement, watching, but never coming closer. It's as if they are waiting for something to happen. You can't help but feel that the Vikings are on the brink of something. You know it's not just the winter they have to survive, but something more, something that lies just beyond the edge of the forest, something they are not yet prepared for. The tension between the two peoples is palpable, and it feels like a storm is brewing, one that could tear everything apart. As the days shorten and the nights lengthen, you continue your work, trying to stay focused, trying to keep the crew together. But every now and then, you find yourself staring into the dark forest, wondering what secrets it holds. The land of Vinland is both beautiful and terrifying, a place full of promise and danger in equal measure. You've made it this far, but how much farther will you be able to go? And what will happen when the storm finally breaks? Winter has fully set in. The first snowflakes begin to fall, light and delicate, but they quickly blanket the world in a thick, unrelenting layer of white. The forest, once vibrant with color, is now a skeletal structure of trees, their bare branches reaching out like frozen fingers into the gray sky. The days are short, the sun barely rising above the horizon before slipping back into the darkness. Life has slowed, and the settlement, once buzzing with activity, now feels quiet, almost desolate. You've heard the stories of how difficult survival in these lands can be, but nothing quite prepares you for the harshness of the Viking winter in Vinland. The cold is biting, numbing, and relentless. Every breath you take feels like icy daggers stabbing your lungs. You wrap your furs tightly around your shoulders, but the cold still seeps into your bones. The fire is always burning in the center of the settlement, offering a small comfort, but it can't fight off the cold that clings to everything. The settlement is shrinking as more and more of the crew fall ill. The long months of harsh weather are taking their toll. The food supplies that were plentiful in the warmer months are dwindling, and the hunting parties are returning with less and less game. The forests, which seemed full of promise in the spring, are now silent, and even the rivers have slowed to a crawl, frozen beneath a thick crust of ice. The Vikings, normally so capable of surviving the harshest of conditions, are beginning to feel the weight of isolation. The land, which they thought would yield so much, is proving to be far less forgiving than they expected. You spend your days in the shelter, trying to conserve warmth and energy, while the Vikings work tirelessly to maintain what little they have left. But you can see the fatigue in their eyes, the slow collapse of their spirits. The once proud warriors, accustomed to raiding and conquering, are now struggling to simply survive. It's a harsh reminder of the fragility of life, even for the fiercest of people. As the cold settles in, it becomes clear. They are not in control here. The land, the weather, the animals, they are the ones that hold the power now. There's a growing sense of unease among the crew. It's not just the cold, it's something deeper, something instinctual. You can feel it in the way the crew looks at one another, the way they speak in hushed tones. It's as though they are waiting for something to happen. The once constant hum of activity has quieted to a tense stillness. Even the sounds of the forest outside seem to have died down. The birds are gone, the animals are scarce, and there are no more rustlings in the trees. The land feels as though it is holding its breath. And then it happens. A group of natives appears at the edge of the settlement, appearing like shadows against the pale white snow. They are distant, at first, their figures barely visible through the trees. The sight of them causes a ripple of tension among the Vikings. The first instinct is always suspicion, always readiness for battle. But there's something different in the air this time. The natives do not approach aggressively. They stand in the distance, watching, their eyes not full of hostility, but rather of curiosity. Still, the tension is palpable. Leif Erikson gathers the crew, and there's a whispered conversation about what to do. The winter is hard, and there are fewer resources to go around. The Vikings, once so confident in their ability to conquer any land, now find themselves at the mercy of the very place they hope to claim. It's a humbling moment for them. But Leif, ever the leader, knows that the future of this settlement will depend on how they handle these interactions with the native peoples. Tensions are running high, and the slightest misstep could ignite a firestorm. The next day, Leif approaches the native group, his stance calm but alert. The two groups meet at the border of the settlement, standing several paces apart. The wind howls between them, carrying the cold and the uncertainty of the situation. No one speaks at first. The Vikings are cautious, their hands resting near their weapons, but they do not draw them. The natives, too, remain still, their faces unreadable. It's a standoff, neither side willing to make the first move. Then finally, Leif speaks. His voice carries over the wind, his words slow and measured. "We seek peace," he says. The native leader, tall and imposing, steps forward, his face still hidden beneath a fur cloak, but his eyes are sharp. He speaks, though his language is foreign, his words harsh and unfamiliar. Leif doesn't flinch. The language barrier is a challenge, but there's a mutual understanding that words will not settle things. The Vikings and the natives are too different to communicate easily. But there's one thing the Vikings and the natives share: a respect for strength. Slowly, with careful movements, Leif offers a gesture of goodwill, a symbol of peace, a hand extended. The native leader looks at it for a long moment before he steps forward and, to the surprise of the crew, places his hand in Leif's. It's not much, but it's enough to break the tension. The moment stretches, and you feel the shift in the air, the first crack in the storm that has been building for months. Despite the uneasy peace, there's no denying the underlying tension. The native peoples have their own ways of living, their own relationship with the land, and the Vikings, despite their intentions, are still outsiders here. The winter continues, and the harsh conditions only seem to make the divide between the two peoples more apparent. The Vikings cannot thrive without the land's cooperation, and the native peoples are watching, unsure of what the future holds for both of them. The snow continues to fall, covering the land in a blanket of white, and with each passing day, the tension grows. It's a delicate balance now. The Vikings have come to stay, but whether they will be able to do so without conflict, whether they will find peace in this wild land, is still uncertain. The struggle for survival continues as both sides watch each other, waiting for the other to make the next move. The weeks stretch on, and the Viking settlement continues to grapple with the harsh reality of winter in Vinland. The food stores are running low, and hunting parties return more empty-handed each day. The cold is relentless, biting through the thick furs that once offered protection. The once thriving settlement now feels like a shadow of itself. its activities limited to the bare essentials, keeping the fires burning, maintaining shelter, and ensuring survival. The Vikings have grown thinner, their faces gaunt from lack of food and the toll of winter. But despite the toll, they continue their work with a fierce determination, for this is not the end of their journey, but only the beginning. But amid the daily struggle to survive, something strange is happening. The tension between the Vikings and the natives is not escalating as expected. The first meeting, while tentative, seemed to break some of the barriers between the two peoples. There is still caution, of course, still an underlying sense that neither side fully trusts the other, but something is beginning to shift. The natives, once distant and observing from the shadows of the trees, have started to engage more. Small exchanges are being made, shared food, gestures of goodwill, cautious conversations. It's not much, but it's something. The Vikings are still wary, of course. It's in their nature to fight, to conquer, to take what they believe is theirs. But the prospect of living in this wild land, of surviving through another long winter, has tempered that instinct. In many ways, the settlement is a mirror of the land itself, wild, untamed, full of promise, but equally full of danger. The land offers resources, but it also demands respect, and the Vikings are learning that they cannot simply impose their will on it as they have done in other lands. You, too, have felt the shift. At night, when the fire burns low and the crew gathers to share what little food they have, there is a sense of quiet camaraderie. Even as the cold seeps into your bones, there's a warmth in the shared silence, in the knowing that the crew has come together to survive this far. The endless uncertainty that once hung over the settlement has started to settle into something more palpable, a shared understanding that there is strength in unity, in respect for the land, and perhaps even for the people who inhabit it. Despite the small steps toward peace, there are still tensions that can't be ignored. The land remains difficult, and the natives are still unfamiliar and unpredictable. A few members of the crew are still skeptical about any sort of cooperation. They're just waiting for us to weaken, they say in low voices, waiting for us to starve or freeze so they can take what we've built. The fear of being seen as weak, of being vulnerable, is a powerful thing for a Viking. And even as they begin to trade small amounts of food with the native peoples, there's a part of them that sees it as a transaction, a temporary arrangement, not a lasting peace. But you've seen it yourself, the way the natives seem to regard the land differently. They move through it with ease, as though they are part of it, as though they understand its language. In contrast, the Vikings are outsiders here, always struggling against the cold, the snow, the wilderness. It's not just a matter of survival, it's a matter of belonging. The native peoples don't need to force the land to give them what they need. They take only what's necessary, respecting its limits. For the Vikings, that kind of restraint is foreign. It's a lesson they are still struggling to learn. The winter drags on, but the small exchanges between the two groups continue. The Vikings learn to hunt in new ways, adapting to the unfamiliar terrain. The natives offer advice on trapping and fishing, showing them the secret places in the river where fish are plentiful. In return, the Vikings teach the natives about forging metal, sharing the skills that have made them so successful in battle. But the learning is slow, tentative. No one knows what the future will hold. The isolation of the winter has brought out a new awareness of the environment, and the Vikings begin to develop a deeper understanding of their surroundings. They start to notice the subtle patterns of the weather, the way the forest shifts with the seasons, the places where game is more plentiful, where the rivers run deeper. It's a survival skill they didn't expect to need, but here, in this wild land, it's essential. The crew is learning the value of patience, of listening to the land rather than trying to impose their will on it. It's a humbling realization, but it's one that seems to carry the promise of survival. And yet, despite the shared moments of peace, there's still a feeling of unease that lingers. The land remains harsh, unforgiving. The long winter shows no sign of ending, and the threat of starvation continues to loom over the settlement. There are still many unknowns. The relationship between the Vikings and the native peoples is delicate, and the slightest misstep could shatter the fragile peace that has begun to take root. The Vikings have made their mark on this land, but whether they will be able to keep it remains to be seen. The native peoples, too, are watching closely. They've offered help, but what do they expect in return? Will the Vikings be able to provide them with something of value, or will they simply take and leave, as the raiders of old did? The thought lingers, an unspoken question between the two groups. The storm outside continues to rage, and the settlement stands against it like a small island in the vast, uncaring sea. The Vikings and the natives have yet to find a common language, yet to truly understand one another. But the cold brings a sense of unity, a shared awareness that survival depends on cooperation, on mutual respect. Whether that respect will be enough to overcome the dangers that lie ahead, only time will tell. The long winter drags on, but with each passing day, the Vikings feel the tight grip of survival slowly loosen. The cold continues to bite, the winds howling through the trees, but there's a glimmer of hope that has begun to shine through the darkness. The cooperation with the native peoples, fragile as it may be, seems to be yielding some results. The shared knowledge of the land, the exchange of food and resources, has provided some relief. The Vikings have learned to hunt the animals of this land more efficiently, and the native people have begun to understand the importance of the tools and weapons the Vikings can forge from the iron they brought with them. The land is still harsh, but now there is something different in the air, an unspoken sense of possibility. The Vikings have realized that their strength alone will not sustain them here. It is not enough to simply fight for what they want. They must adapt, learn, and respect the land if they hope to survive. In many ways, the wildness of Vinland has taught them a humility they never expected. They can no longer rely solely on their iron swords and shields, their power to take what they want by force. Instead, they are learning to respect the cycles of nature, to read the signs the land offers, and to understand the people who have lived here for so long. The settlement has begun to thrive in small ways. New structures have been built, and the crew's spirits, while still weary, have begun to lift. The air smells less of desperation now, and more of purpose. The Vikings are settling into this new rhythm, learning that survival is as much about patience as it is about strength. They still struggle with the isolation, with the never-ending cold, but there's a resilience in them that cannot be extinguished. They've been through worse, and they will continue to push forward. But even with this newfound stability, the questions remain. How long can the fragile peace between the Vikings and the natives last? What do the natives truly want from the Vikings? There are whispers among the crew about trade agreements, about the possibility of a deeper alliance. But there are also those who remain suspicious, who see the native peoples as a threat, as something to be feared rather than befriended. The division within the Viking ranks is growing, and it is clear that the future of the settlement may rest on how the two groups can coexist, or whether conflict will erupt once again. One evening, as the crew gathers around the fire, there's a change in the air. The usual murmur of conversation is replaced by a heavy silence. The native leader has come to the settlement again, but this time, he's not alone. There are more of his people with him, men and women, their eyes wary but curious. They approach cautiously, and Leif Erikson, as always, steps forward to greet them. There's a palpable tension in the air as the two leaders stand face to face, the weight of their people's hopes and fears hanging in the balance. Leif speaks first, his voice calm but firm. "We have survived together," he says, "and we have learned. But we need more. We need to understand one another fully, to share what we know of this land. If we are to coexist, there must be trust." The native leader nods, his expression unreadable. The two of them exchange a long look, and for a moment you wonder what is passing between them. It's clear that neither side fully trusts the other, but there's something in the way they stand, mutual respect, perhaps, that suggests a potential for something greater. The conversation continues in measured tones. You can't understand the language, but the gestures are clear enough. There's an offer from the natives, a promise of more help, more guidance on the land. And in return, the Vikings offer knowledge of their own, tools, weapons, metalwork. It's not an agreement yet, but it feels like the beginning of something new. The air feels different now, less tense, more hopeful. There's a sense that this could be the turning point, the moment when the two groups stop seeing one another as enemies, as competitors for the land, and start viewing each other as partners. The cold still lingers, and the land is far from tame, but the beginning of something new is unfolding in this strange corner of the world. The Vikings have fought for everything they have, and the natives have done the same. But now there's a recognition between them, a recognition that survival in this land is not about conquest, but about collaboration. The promise of Vinland is no longer just about riches and resources. It's about something deeper, about building a future together, finding common ground in the face of adversity. As the days pass, the Vikings and the native peoples begin to work more closely together. The exchange of goods becomes more regular, the relationships more amicable. The settlement begins to feel more like a community as the two groups share knowledge, tools, and stories. The divide that once seemed so insurmountable is slowly shrinking, replaced by a sense of mutual dependence. The Vikings, who once came here to claim the land as their own, are beginning to realize that this land is not something to possess. It is something to nurture, something to protect. But even as the Vikings settle into their new way of life, there are still dangers lurking just beneath the surface. The harshness of the land has not gone away, and the threat of the unknown still looms large. There are whispers in the settlement about strange occurrences, figures in the trees, animals acting unnaturally. Some of the crew still believe that the land itself is alive, that it is pushing back against the Vikings. The natives, too, speak of the land's restless spirit. The question remains, can the Vikings truly adapt to this new world, or will the land eventually drive them away, just as it has driven others before? The seasons will change, and the future remains uncertain. But one thing is clear, the Vikings will continue to fight, to adapt, and to survive. For in Vinland, survival is the greatest victory of all. Spring arrives slowly, creeping in like a hesitant visitor. The snow begins to melt, leaving behind a soft, soggy earth that smells faintly of decay. The trees, their branches once bare and skeletal, now begin to stir with new life, buds forming on the twigs, a soft green haze returning to the landscape. The change is subtle but undeniable. The long, brutal winter has loosened its grip, and the land, for the first time since the Vikings' arrival, feels alive again. The Vikings, tired from the bitter cold and grueling months of survival, begin to emerge from their shelters with renewed energy. There is a sense of excitement in the air, a palpable relief that the worst may be over. The fire in the center of the settlement crackles brighter, and the warmth of the sun, though weak, is a welcome change. You can feel it too, the way the light seems to chase away the lingering shadows of isolation and uncertainty. The work that needs to be done to repair the damage of winter is overwhelming. The Vikings set about rebuilding what was lost in the storms, reinforcing shelters, mending fishing nets, and preparing the fields for planting. The land, so harsh and indifferent in the winter months, now feels like a partner in the struggle for survival. The earth, though still hard, is beginning to thaw, and the first signs of life in the soil bring hope. The Vikings know that this is their chance, their moment to finally make the land their own. But the task ahead remains daunting. Despite the energy that fills the settlement, there is a lingering wariness. The peace with the native peoples, though fragile, has held. The exchange of knowledge continues, with the natives offering advice on planting and gathering food, while the Vikings share their techniques for building and forging. The balance, however, is delicate. There are some among the Vikings who still harbor distrust, those who feel that the native peoples are simply biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike. It is an unsettling thought, and one that's hard to ignore, especially with the land's mysteries still lingering at the edges of the settlement. For you, the arrival of spring is a moment of reflection. As the settlement begins to come back to life, you take stock of everything you've learned, everything you've endured. The sense of struggle that once felt overwhelming now seems to have shifted into something else, something deeper, something more enduring. This journey, this exploration of Vinland, has been one of both hardship and discovery. The early days were full of uncertainty, full of the rawness of survival, but now, as the land begins to awaken, there's a growing sense that you've become part of something larger, something that transcends the struggle to survive. The first full day of spring is marked by a great feast in the settlement. The fires burn brighter, the scent of roasting meat and freshly baked bread fills the air. It's a celebration of survival, of endurance, and of the tentative peace between the Vikings and the native peoples. The exchange of food is a symbol of this new understanding. Both groups sit together around the fire, sharing in the bounty of the land. The native peoples are cautious, still distant, but there's a new openness in the way they interact with the Vikings. The language barrier remains, but the gestures, the shared moments of laughter, tell a story of cooperation, of an unspoken agreement that both sides will do what it takes to live. Yet even amidst the warmth of the fire and the camaraderie, there are still those in the Viking ranks who remain uneasy. It is easy to celebrate survival when the threat of death has receded. But what will happen when the next storm comes, when the next winter arrives? There are whispers of raids, of returning to their old ways, of leaving Vinland behind if the settlement becomes too difficult to defend. The restlessness of the Vikings is never far from the surface. It is in their blood to be explorers, conquerors, and warriors, and Vinland, with all its beauty and challenges, still feels like a world that has yet to fully accept them. You can feel it too, the tension that remains beneath the surface. The native peoples are still a mystery, their intentions still unclear. Despite the promises of peace, there is no guarantee that it will last. The question that hangs in the air is simple. Can the Vikings truly coexist with the native peoples, or will this fragile alliance crumble when the next trial arises? There's another tension in the air, something less tangible but equally potent, the land itself. Vinland is full of promise, but it is also full of danger. The beauty of the forests, the rivers, the wildlife masks a harsh reality. There are parts of the land that still feel alien, parts of it that don't seem to welcome the Vikings' presence. And as the crew moves further into the wilderness to explore, they begin to encounter signs of that resistance. Strange markings on trees, unexplainable sounds in the night, animals behaving oddly. It's enough to stir old fears, old superstitions. Despite the ever-present tension, the Vikings continue to build. They begin to plant crops, relying on the knowledge shared by the natives. They forge ahead, not with the same blind confidence they had when they first set foot on this land, but with something more measured, more cautious. There's still much to learn, and the uncertainty of the future weighs heavily on the settlement. But the work continues, because survival is no longer just a question of strength. It's about adaptation, about understanding the land and those who already call it home. And as you work, you can't help but wonder what the future holds. Can the Vikings truly make a home in Vinland, or will they be driven out, like so many before them? The answers are not clear, and the only certainty is that this journey, this chapter in history, is far from over. The land, the people, and the unknowns that still lurk in the forest are all part of a story that is still unfolding. The future is unwritten, and the Vikings, for all their strength and determination, are still searching for their place in this wild, untamed world. As the weeks stretch into summer, the air begins to feel warmer, the sunlight stronger. The long, cold months of winter are behind the Vikings, and the land of Vinland begins to reveal itself in a way that feels more like home. The settlement, once so bare and fragile, is beginning to grow. New structures are rising from the earth, their wooden beams standing tall against the sky. The crops, though still young and tender, are sprouting with hope, offering a glimpse of the abundance that this land promises. The Vikings have begun to put down roots, both figuratively and literally. The once foreign world is now becoming part of their lives. Yet, even as the settlement flourishes, the uneasy truce between the Vikings and the native peoples remains ever present. The natives continue to visit the settlement, offering their help, sharing knowledge, and providing guidance. They teach the Vikings how to cultivate the soil, how to recognize the plants and animals that can sustain them through the seasons. There's a growing sense of mutual reliance between the two groups, but the tension has not fully dissipated. Each encounter carries the weight of centuries of history, of different ways of life, and of unspoken fears. While the Vikings have learned to work with the land, their mistrust of the natives still lingers like a shadow, a reminder of the old world they left behind. You can feel the discomfort too. Even as you work alongside the natives, learning their ways, you know that there are boundaries that remain unspoken. The language gap is still wide, and though the Vikings have become adept at reading the land and learning from the natives, there are still those moments of silence, moments of doubt when you wonder if this piece is as fragile as it seems. You watch as some of the crew go about their work with an air of suspicion, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line, as though expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. It's hard to shake the feeling that the Vikings are still strangers here, that the land and its people are something they will never fully understand. The relationship between the two groups has become more complicated. It is no longer simply about trade or survival. It has become about identity. The Vikings, once so sure of their place in the world, are now forced to reckon with the reality that they are no longer conquerors, but settlers. They have come to this land not to claim it by force, but to live in it. This shift in mindset is subtle, but it's present in every decision, every action. The Vikings are beginning to realize that they will need to coexist with the native peoples if they are to survive here. The land is too vast, too untamed for anyone to dominate it alone, but there is still much work to be done. The crops must be tended to, the shelter reinforced, the tools sharpened. The Vikings, though weary, have not lost their drive. They move with purpose, their once raw determination now tempered by a deeper understanding of the challenges they face. It is no longer just about conquering new lands. It is about carving out a life in a world that does not bend to their will. This shift is not easy for the crew, many of whom are warriors at heart, but it's one they must accept if they are to thrive in Vinland. There are still the whispers, the doubt that perhaps this land is not meant for them, that perhaps the natives will one day decide they are no longer welcome. Some of the crew talk of leaving, of returning to Greenland, to the known world. It's not the first time the thought has crossed their minds, but this time, it feels different. There is a part of you that wonders if the Vikings are truly meant to stay in Vinland, or if this land will prove too difficult to tame. Every day, the crew grows more invested in their survival here, but every day, they also grow more anxious. The unknowns, the strange occurrences in the woods, the occasional signs of trouble from the native peoples, continue to hover over them, like an ever-present storm on the horizon. And then there are the dreams. The strange, unsettling dreams that many of the crew have begun to experience. They are vivid, full of wild images, storms, battles, figures standing on the edges of the settlement, watching from the trees. You've had them too. At night when you lie awake, the quiet of the forest seems to pulse with life. And sometimes, just as you begin to fall asleep, you can almost hear the whispering voices of the land. It is as though the land itself is trying to speak, to tell you something important. You can't make sense of it, but you know it's not just the weight of isolation that causes this unease. It's something deeper, something that seems tied to the land itself. It's during one of these nights, as the wind howls outside the shelter, that a figure appears at the edge of the settlement, a native man, his face obscured by the shadow of his hood, his movements fluid and quiet. He stands there for a long moment, as though watching the Vikings. He doesn't speak, but his presence is enough to send a ripple of unease through the settlement. The crew stirs, some of them reaching for their weapons, while others hesitate. Leif Erikson steps forward, his voice calm but firm as he approaches the figure. The native man gestures toward the forest, his expression unreadable. There is something in his eyes, something ancient, something deep, that makes you shiver. He does not speak, but his meaning is clear. The land is restless. Something is coming, something that the Vikings are not prepared for. The warning is simple, but chilling. As Leif exchanges a few words with the man, you can't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The figure disappears back into the woods as silently as he came, leaving behind only the unsettling sense that something is stirring beneath the surface, waiting to reveal itself. The dreams, the unease, the signs from the land, they all seem to point toward one thing. The Vikings are not yet in control of this world. They may have survived the harsh winters, but the true test is yet to come. The unsettling events of the previous night linger like a dark cloud over the settlement. The wind that once felt like a sign of the changing seasons now feels ominous, whispering through the trees, carrying with it a sense of something waiting just beyond the horizon. The native figure, with his cryptic gesture, has planted a seed of doubt in the minds of the Vikings. The land, once viewed as a vast canvas for conquest, now feels like something much more alive and perhaps more dangerous than they originally thought. The uneasy truce with the natives takes on new meaning as the reality of their warning of the unknown forces in the wilderness is impossible to ignore. You can feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. The crew, usually so confident in their ability to adapt, now seems on edge. They work harder than ever, reinforcing shelters, strengthening the perimeter, and keeping a watchful eye on the forest. The Vikings, ever pragmatic, are not easily shaken, but something has shifted. The once familiar tasks of farming, building, and forging now carry a sense of urgency. Every sound, every movement feels like a potential threat. The land itself has become a mystery, an enigma, and the sense that the Vikings are intruders in someone else's world deepens with each passing day. Leif Erikson, as ever, takes charge. He gathers the crew for a meeting, his face grave but resolute. "We will not be driven from this place," he declares. His voice carries the weight of command, but even he seems to be grappling with the unease that has taken hold of the settlement. "We have come this far. We will face whatever comes with strength." There's a fire in his eyes, but the tension in the air tells a different story. The crew nods, some of them with determination, others with uncertainty. There are no easy answers, only the certainty that they cannot retreat. The work continues, but it is not the same. The once hopeful rebuilding now feels like a necessary defense against the unknown. As the days pass, the sense of something watching, something moving in the shadows, grows stronger. The strange figure that appeared at the settlement's edge the previous night has not been seen again, but the fear that something is out there, just beyond sight, lingers. The crew discusses their options in hushed voices, sometimes around the fire, other times while they tend to the animals or repair their tools. They know that the land, with its beauty and bounty, is not without its darker side. There are whispers of ancient spirits, of restless forces that dwell deep within the forest, hidden from those who do not know the land's true ways. The dreamlike visions of figures in the trees continue to haunt the settlement, and it seems that more and more of the crew are experiencing them. It's not just the whispers in the wind or the soft rustlings of the trees that have begun to unsettle the Vikings. It's the sensation of being watched, the feeling that the land is alive in a way they had never anticipated. The nights are filled with uneasy sleep, and the moments of quiet become filled with anticipation, as though something is about to happen, something the Vikings cannot control. In the midst of this growing uncertainty, a group of native peoples arrive at the settlement once more. This time, however, they come with a different energy, one that is not merely watchful, but alert. They carry with them strange symbols, carvings etched into the bark of trees, and items that seem to have meaning beyond what the Vikings can understand. The atmosphere shifts immediately, the air grows tense, and the Vikings find themselves unsure of how to respond. Is this a sign of aggression or something else? Leif steps forward to meet them, his expression unreadable, but his posture strong. The leader of the native group, a woman with long dark hair and sharp eyes, approaches with the symbols in hand. She holds them up for Leif to see, her gesture solemn and deliberate. The others stand silently behind her, watching the exchange closely. Leif takes the symbols, his brow furrowing as he examines them. The markings are unfamiliar, cryptic, but the weight of their significance seems clear. "What does this mean?" Leif asks, his voice low but steady. The native leader speaks in her language, and though the Vikings cannot understand her words, the meaning is clear in her gaze. She points to the forest, to the deep, shadowed woods that have always loomed at the edge of the settlement, and then back to the symbols, indicating that these things are warnings. Warnings about the land, about what lies beyond the tree line. Her message is simple. The land is restless, and the forces within it are not to be ignored. There is a heavy silence as the Vikings absorb her words. The feeling that something is coming, something beyond their control, fills the air like a thick fog. The dreamlike visions of figures in the trees, the whispers, the strange occurrences, all of it begins to make sense. The land is not simply a place to live. It is a living force, one that has watched over this place for centuries. And it seems that the Vikings, in their desire to conquer it, have unknowingly disturbed something ancient. Leif exchanges a look with his crew, his face filled with the weight of their situation. There is a moment of hesitation, a fleeting second when it seems as if the future is uncertain. But then he stands tall, the resolve of a leader settling over him. "We will stay," he says firmly. "We will learn from the land, from the people. We will survive." But even as he speaks those words, you can feel the unease that remains. The native leader's warning hangs in the air like a dark cloud, and the crew's anxiety grows. It's clear that Vinland is no simple world to conquer. It is a place full of secrets, full of dangers that the Vikings cannot yet understand. The land is not waiting to be claimed, it is waiting to be respected. And the Vikings will have to learn that lesson if they hope to make it their home. As the native group departs, the crew stands in silence, watching them disappear into the forest. You wonder if the land will ever truly accept the Vikings, or if they will continue to be strangers, forever outsiders in a world that was never theirs to conquer. The unknowns are vast, and the challenges ahead seem endless. But one thing is certain, the Vikings have come this far. And no matter what happens, they will not retreat. The days following the native leader's visit are heavy with a strange kind of stillness. The symbols she left with the Vikings continue to weigh on the minds of the crew, each glance at the forest sparking unease. The whispers in the trees seem louder now, the wind feeling sharper as it cuts through the settlement. The once familiar cold bite of winter has been replaced by a tense anticipation, as though the very land is waiting for something to happen, something that the Vikings are not yet ready to face. The settlement moves forward with its work, but there's a difference now. Everyone is more vigilant. The sound of axes chopping wood seems to echo unnervingly, the rhythm of daily tasks now punctuated with a sense of expectation. The work still has to be done, but it feels like there's something more pressing hanging in the air, something out of reach, just beneath the surface of normality. The settlers are caught between their drive to build and the unsettling feeling that their presence in Vinland is anything but welcome. You watch the crew as they go about their tasks. There is less laughter now, less camaraderie in the air. Conversations are quieter, more subdued. Everyone is on edge. It's as if the native people's warning has found its way into the bones of the Vikings. And there is a shared sense that, for all their strength, they are still very much at the mercy of this wild land. You, too, can feel the weight of it. How the land, despite offering sustenance and shelter, seems to grow more restless with every passing day. The settlement is slowly expanding, but not without signs of strain. Some of the newly constructed huts seem to sag as though the earth beneath them is reluctant to support them. The crops, once promising, are beginning to show signs of something amiss, strange patches of withered growth, unexpected cold snaps that damage the young plants. The river, once flowing with an abundance of fish, is quieter now, and the animals that had roamed freely in the early spring seem to have disappeared, leaving the woods eerily still. It's as though nature itself is retreating, withdrawing from the settlers as they encroach further into the land. The strange occurrences intensify. One evening, while on a routine patrol outside the settlement, you find yourself staring into the woods, the trees casting long shadows under the dimming light of dusk. There's a figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching silently from behind the trunks of the trees. It's too far away to make out clearly, but it feels like a presence, something more than just a person. It's a fleeting glimpse. By the time you blink, the figure is gone, swallowed up by the dense undergrowth. You hurry back to the settlement, your heart racing, but no one else has seen anything. The crew dismisses your concern, but you know what you saw. There's something in the forest, something that watches. The land, the wilderness, it feels different now. It feels as though it has taken on a life of its own, pushing back against the settlers, testing their resolve. As the days pass, more members of the crew report similar sightings, shadows in the trees, figures standing just out of sight, never moving, always watching. Some of the crew laugh it off, attributing it to the stress of the past months. But others are starting to believe there is something more to these occurrences, something unexplainable, something that the Vikings have not yet reckoned with. The stories of strange dreams and restless nights grow more frequent, and the sense that the land is rejecting the Vikings' presence continues to grow. The land, it seems, is alive with forces that are beyond the reach of even the strongest warriors. Leif Erikson, always the calm and steady leader, calls for a meeting with the crew. His face is grim, the weight of the situation clearly settling in. "We are not here to simply survive," he says, his voice steady but full of resolve. "We are here to build, to live. But we must do so with respect for this land and its power. The land is not something we conquer, it is something we coexist with." His words, though firm, carry a note of uncertainty. The Vikings, so used to claiming what they want by force, are now faced with a reality where strength alone is not enough. This is not a land to be dominated. The native peoples have understood this for generations, and perhaps it is time for the Vikings to learn that lesson as well. But as Leif speaks, you can't help but wonder, is it too late for that? Can the Vikings truly coexist with the land, or will the forces of Vinland overwhelm them? The strange events continue to unfold, and the whispers in the woods become more frequent, more urgent. It feels like something is coming, something the Vikings are not prepared for, something that will shake the very foundation of their presence in Vinland. As the weeks pass, the sense of inevitability grows. The settlement continues to expand, but every new structure feels like it's built on shaky ground, as though the very earth beneath the Vikings' feet is trying to reject them. The crops, though planted with care, continue to suffer. The game that was once abundant is harder to find. The animals, too, seem to be avoiding the settlement. It's as though the land itself is holding its breath, waiting for something. Despite the unease, the Vikings refuse to leave. Their spirit, that unyielding drive to survive and to build, keeps them moving forward. They have come this far, and they will not turn back. But you, standing on the edge of the settlement, can't help but feel that the land is pushing back, testing the settlers in ways they cannot yet understand. There is something here, something older than the Vikings' desire for conquest. And as the days pass, that something grows closer, and the Vikings will soon have to confront it, whether they are ready or not. The summer deepens, but the promise of warmth and abundance seems to fade as quickly as the days grow longer. The Vikings, once so proud and certain of their place in the world, now move with an increasing sense of weariness. The land, beautiful and fierce, continues to resist their every effort to tame it. There are days when the sun shines brightly, but those are followed by nights filled with bone-chilling cold and restless winds. The crops, once so promising, wither or fail altogether, and the game that had been plentiful in the spring is now scarce, hiding deeper in the forest, farther away from the settlement. There is a growing fear among the crew that something is not right. The strange occurrences are no longer just whispers or fleeting moments of unease. They are becoming tangible, unavoidable. The visions in the trees, the figures that stand silently watching the settlement, are no longer only seen by a few. More and more members of the crew report the same experiences, glimpses of shadowy figures just beyond the tree line, staring out from the darkness of the forest. Sometimes these figures seem to move, but always at the edges of vision, always disappearing when someone tries to get a closer look. The tensions that had simmered beneath the surface now come to a head. There are arguments within the settlement, fractures forming among the Vikings. Some are determined to push forward, to fight through the growing unease and the land's resistance. Others, however, begin to whisper of leaving, of returning to Greenland, where the known dangers seem more bearable than the unknown forces they now face. The fear that has quietly seeped into the hearts of the crew is growing louder, and it's becoming harder to ignore. Leif Erikson, ever the leader, refuses to entertain the idea of retreat. "We stay," he says, his voice calm but firm. "We are Vikings. We do not run. We fight, we adapt, and we live." But even as he speaks those words, you can see the doubt in his eyes, the uncertainty that has taken root deep inside him. He is not blind to the strange happenings, nor to the growing unease that grips the crew. He knows that the land is not yielding, and that it may never yield. But the Vikings, with their fierce determination, have always believed that strength alone can overcome any obstacle. Now, for the first time, it feels as though that belief is being tested in ways they cannot control. You walk through the settlement, watching the men and women of the crew, each of them carrying the burden of survival in their own way. Some work silently, focused only on their tasks, while others exchange nervous glances, their minds clearly elsewhere. It's clear that this is no longer just about building a settlement in a new world. It's about surviving a land that seems to reject them, a land that seems to have its own ancient power. The Vikings are no longer just settlers, they are intruders, fighting not only the elements, but the very land itself. One evening, as the sun dips below the horizon, a group of you set out on a routine hunting expedition. The shadows in the forest are long, stretching far into the trees, and the air is thick with an almost oppressive stillness. The forest seems to hold its breath, the usual sounds of wildlife missing. The trees loom like silent sentinels, their dark branches intertwined above you, blocking out the last of the dying sunlight. You venture deeper into the forest, your senses heightened, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig making you tense. There's a sense of something watching, something following, and you can't shake the feeling that the very forest is aware of your presence. It's hard to focus on the task at hand, the hunt, when your mind keeps returning to the sense of being watched, the feeling that something ancient and unknown is standing just beyond your reach. As you move deeper into the woods, the feeling intensifies. The shadows grow longer, and the trees seem to close in around you, the air growing colder. You stop, the hairs on the back of your neck standing on end. Something is out there, something that isn't natural. You hear a rustling ahead, and your hand instinctively moves to the hilt of your sword. The rustling continues, but it's not the sound of an animal. It's something else, something too deliberate, too controlled. The tension snaps when you catch sight of a figure standing between the trees, barely visible, blending into the darkness. It's the same figure you've seen before, the shadow in the forest, the one who always watches from the edges of your vision. This time, though, the figure doesn't disappear. It stands there, unmoving, staring back at you. You take a step forward, your heart pounding in your chest, but the figure remains still, as if waiting for you to approach. You freeze, unsure of what to do. There's no fear in the figure's presence, only a cold certainty. You feel it in your bones. This is no simple scout, no solitary figure. It's something older, something tied to the land, something that has always been here. As if sensing your hesitation, the figure slowly raises its hand and beckons you forward, the gesture slow and deliberate. You hesitate, but the pull is strong. You take a step forward, then another and another, until you are standing in front of the figure, so close that you can almost feel the weight of its presence. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanishes into the shadows, leaving you standing alone in the stillness of the forest. The air feels colder, the shadows deeper, and the forest seems to close in around you, swallowing you whole. You turn back toward the settlement, your heart racing, but the figure is gone. The feeling of being watched lingers, heavy and suffocating, as though the forest itself has seen you, marked you, and is now waiting for you to make your next move. When you return to the settlement, you say nothing of what you saw, though the unease is palpable in your chest. It is clear now that the land is not simply indifferent to the Vikings. It is alive, aware, and watching. The question remains, can the Vikings truly survive in Vinland, or will they be driven out by forces and more powerful than anything they have faced before? The storm is coming, and the Vikings are still unprepared. The following days pass with an increasing sense of heaviness hanging over the settlement. The unnerving events in the forest, the figure that vanished into the trees, the overwhelming presence that seemed to seep from the land itself, linger in your mind like an unsettling dream that refuses to fade. You've shared nothing of what you saw to the crew, but you know they feel it too. The weight of the land's resistance has become undeniable. The once hopeful feeling that the Vikings could simply conquer and tame this land has been replaced by a growing realization that this world is something altogether different, something far more ancient and untouchable than they could have ever imagined. The work continues, of course. The settlement must survive, and survival requires hard work. The crops need tending, the shelters need repair, and the constant need for food drives the Vikings to hunt and gather as best they can. But every task, every day spent working the land feels increasingly futile, as though the earth itself is slowly pushing back against the settlers' efforts. You see it in the eyes of the crew. The weariness is deeper now, not just from the toil and cold, but from the land itself, as though it has placed an invisible weight on their shoulders. The once proud Vikings, so confident in their abilities, now question their place in this strange, untamed world. Even Leif Erikson, usually so resolute and strong, seems distant, his gaze often lost as if he's contemplating something far beyond the settlement. There are nights when the forest seems to hum with energy, the sound of the wind through the trees carrying with it an odd resonance, like the whispers of voices just beyond hearing. The shadows in the woods feel darker now, deeper. The figures, if figures they are seen again, always at the edge of vision, always just out of reach. They are no longer fleeting glimpses or fleeting shadows. They are real, constant. And every encounter, every night spent listening to the strange, unnatural sounds that drift through the trees, only reinforces the growing belief among the crew that something is wrong. The land is not merely indifferent to their presence. It is watching them, testing them. Despite the fear that hangs in the air, the Vikings continue to push forward. They are, after all, a people born of strength and resolve, and they will not be easily broken. There are no words of retreat spoken aloud, though many think them. But even in their determination, there is the nagging feeling that the land is not just a challenge to be overcome, but a force to be reckoned with, something that can't be conquered by mere strength alone. For the first time since they arrived, the Vikings are faced with a test of endurance and humility rather than one of force. One afternoon, as you walk through the settlement, you spot a few of the crew gathered near the edge of the forest. The air between them is thick with tension, and you hear hushed voices as you approach. You overhear snippets of conversation, but it's clear that something is happening. The group is discussing the strange occurrences in the woods, the figures that have been seen, the eerie sense that the forest is alive with something ancient. One of the crew, a seasoned hunter named Bjorn, speaks loudly enough for the group to hear. "There is no fighting this. The land wants us gone. It will not let us settle here." There is a murmur of agreement, but not everyone is convinced. Some argue that the strange occurrences are merely a result of too much isolation, the product of fatigue and too many long, cold nights. Others are less sure, their eyes cast nervously toward the woods, as though expecting the shadows to close in around them at any moment. Leif Erikson arrives just as the conversation begins to escalate. His face is stern, his posture straight, but there is an edge of exhaustion that you've never seen before. "Enough," he says, his voice cutting through the tension. "We will not let fear take hold here. We came to build. We came to survive, and we will do so. If the land wishes to test us, then we will show it that we will not be swayed." His words are strong, but there's an undercurrent of uncertainty, a crack in the resolve that the crew can feel. For all the bravery and strength that Leif represents, even he can't deny the weight of the fear that's slowly taking hold of the settlement. There is a deep, uneasy silence that falls over the group. The decision is clear. The Vikings will stay. They will not turn back. But it is becoming clearer with each passing day that survival is no longer just about overcoming the elements. It's about facing something far more mysterious, something much darker. That evening, as the sun sets and the firelight flickers in the center of the settlement, a heavy fog rolls in from the forest. It is thick and low, blanketing the settlement in a dense shroud. The air feels damp, the scent of the forest mingling with the earth, but there is something else, something colder. The fog clings to everything, soaking into the bones, filling the air with a quiet, oppressive weight. As the fog settles in, you hear the sounds from the woods. At first, it's just a whisper, a rustle, a shift in the wind. But then it grows. A soft, low murmur that rises and falls like a chant, distant but clear. The sound is strange, alien, like voices speaking in a language you can't understand, a rhythm that pulses with a kind of ancient power. The crew gathers around the fire, their eyes wide, their expressions filled with a mix of curiosity and fear. No one speaks at first, too afraid to break the silence. The chanting grows louder, more insistent, echoing through the fog, until it feels as though the very air is alive with it. The forest itself seems to be speaking, and the Vikings, despite their strength and courage, find themselves shivering in the presence of something far greater than they are. Leif steps forward, his voice breaking the silence. "Do not be afraid," he says, though there is a tremor in his voice that betrays his own fear. "This is no enemy. This is the land speaking to us." But as the chanting rises and the fog thickens, it becomes harder to believe him. The Vikings, who once believed they could conquer anything, now find themselves on the edge of a mystery far beyond their understanding. The land has begun to make its presence known, and the question is no longer if the Vikings can conquer it, but whether the land will allow them to stay at all. Word count. After. The night stretches on, and the fog does not lift. It lingers thickly in the air, as if the land itself is shrouding the settlement, wrapping it in a blanket of mystery and fear. The sound of chanting in the distance continues, rising and falling like the wind itself is speaking in tongues. The crew, huddled around the fire, watch the fog warily, their eyes flicking nervously toward the dark edges of the settlement. Even the familiar warmth of the fire seems less comforting tonight, and the shadows seem longer, more sinister. Despite the unease that grips the crew, the decision has been made. The Vikings will not leave. They are not the kind to be easily driven away. But as the night drags on and the fog thickens, even the most stalwart among them begin to question the wisdom of their resolve. The voices in the mist seem to grow louder, more insistent, as though the land itself is challenging them. The air feels heavy, charged with something ancient, something beyond comprehension. Leif Erikson stands by the fire, his face solemn, watching the fog swirl around the settlement. There's a weariness in his eyes now, a heaviness that wasn't there before. The certainty that once defined him seems to have shifted. "We must face whatever this is," he says, his voice strong, but with a trace of doubt that can't be hidden. "We will show the land our resolve." The crew nods, though there is little conviction in their expressions. Some still stand tall, their Viking blood running hot with defiance, while others glance nervously at the forest, unable to shake the feeling that the land is pushing them back, trying to reclaim what it once owned. The fog, the voices, the strange occurrences, they've all become part of a growing mystery that feels more ominous with each passing day. The night wears on, and the chanting in the fog doesn't stop. It's almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat that beats in time with the pulse of the earth itself. Some of the crew can no longer stay by the fire. The pull of the forest is too strong, and they venture out into the fog, guided only by the dim glow of the lanterns they carry. As they step into the thick mist, the chanting seems to shift, echoing around them in waves. The voices sound closer now, as though the land itself is alive, moving and aware of their presence. You follow behind them, drawn by an instinct you can't explain. The air is thick with fog, the forest eerily silent except for the low murmur of the chanting. The trees, gnarled and twisted, loom like silent sentinels. You can barely make out the figures of the crew members ahead of you, their movements slow and deliberate, as though they too are under some kind of spell. The fog swirls around you, cold and damp, as you move deeper into the forest. The world outside the mist seems to have disappeared, and you are left in a place that feels timeless, untouched. The trees seem to whisper, their branches creaking in the stillness, and the ground beneath your boots seems to pulse with an energy you can't explain. It feels as though the earth itself is alive, watching you, waiting for you to take the next step. As you walk further into the mist, the chanting grows louder, clearer. The voices, once indistinct, now form words, ancient, unintelligible words that send a chill down your spine. You can feel your heart pounding in your chest, your breath coming faster, but you can't stop. The pull of the forest, of the land, is too strong. Suddenly, you come to a clearing in the trees. The fog is thinner here, and the moonlight shines faintly through the mist, casting eerie shadows on the ground. In the center of the clearing stands a circle of stones, weathered by time, their surfaces etched with strange symbols. The chanting is louder now, filling the air, and the stones seem to hum with energy. You realize with a start that the chanting is not coming from the trees or the forest, it is coming from the stones themselves. The crew members standing with you are transfixed, as if in a trance. The air crackles with tension, and you can feel the ground beneath you vibrating with the rhythm of the chanting. There is something powerful here, something ancient, and it feels as though the stones are calling to you, beckoning you forward. Life, his face pale, steps forward, his gaze fixed on the circle of stones. This is not just the land, he murmurs, more to himself than anyone else. This is something older, something that has been here long before we arrived. The crew stands in silence, their eyes wide, their breath shallow. There is a palpable fear in the air, but also a sense of awe, of reverence. Whatever power these stones hold, it is not something that can be fought with strength or force. This is a force older than the Vikings themselves, and they can only stand before it, unsure of what it will demand. The chanting continues to rise, filling the clearing with its eerie cadence. You can feel your heart racing, your breath catching in your throat. The fog thickens again, swirling around the stones, and for a moment, it feels as though the entire forest is closing in on you, pressing in from all sides. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the chanting stops. The silence that follows is deafening. The fog lifts, and the moonlight breaks through the trees, casting long shadows across the stones. The energy that had filled the air moments before dissipates, leaving a heavy stillness in its wake. The crew stands frozen, unsure of what to do next. You are all left in a strange, uneasy silence, the weight of what just happened hanging over you. The land, once so mysterious and beautiful, now feels darker, more dangerous. The stones remain silent, their ancient symbols still glowing faintly in the moonlight, but their power seems to have receded, at least for the moment. Leif speaks first, his voice barely above a whisper. "We leave this place," he commands. "We will not stay here longer than we must." The crew, shaken and uncertain, begins to retreat from the clearing. The fog lifts as you make your way back toward the settlement, but the unease remains, lingering like a shadow in the corners of your mind. The chanting, the stones, the ancient power of the land. It is all too much to fully comprehend. The questions are too many, and the answers too few. As you return to the settlement, you realize that the Vikings have not come to conquer Vinland. They have come to face something far more powerful than they could ever have imagined, a force that does not bend to their will, that does not fear their strength. The land is alive, ancient, and powerful, and it will not be controlled. The Vikings may survive here, but they will never fully tame it. And as the mist finally lifts, you understand, Vinland is not a place for the weak. It is a place for those who can endure the unknown, who can live with the land and its mysteries. But even as the settlement returns to its familiar rhythm, one thing is certain: the Vikings will never be the same again. They have been touched by something ancient, something beyond their understanding, and it will haunt them for as long as they remain in this strange, untamed world. The weeks that follow the strange encounter in the forest are filled with an eerie calm, but beneath the surface, the land's unsettling power seems to linger, watching. The fog, though it no longer rolls in as thickly as before, still seems to creep into the edges of the forest, its presence felt in every shadow, every gust of wind. The Vikings, though resilient, are growing increasingly uneasy. Even as they go about their daily tasks, tending to the crops, reinforcing the settlement, and hunting for food, there is an undercurrent of fear, a sense that the land has marked them in ways they do not fully understand. Leif Erikson, who once led with unshakable resolve, now wears the weight of the unknown on his shoulders. His eyes often drift to the forest, and his gaze carries a distant look, as though he is searching for something in the mist that he cannot name. The crew follows his lead, but the cracks in their resolve are becoming more apparent. The settlers are divided. Some still cling to the belief that they can conquer Vinland, that they are simply facing a test of strength and will. Others are beginning to whisper of leaving, of returning to the safety of Greenland, where the world feels more predictable, more familiar. There is no outward mutiny, no open rebellion, but the seed of doubt has been planted. The land, too, seems to respond to their discomfort. The once bountiful river that had flowed with fish now runs low, and the animals that had been so plentiful in the spring now seem to have disappeared, as if they fled deeper into the woods. The crops, which had started to grow strong under the spring sun, are now withering. The earth is not as giving as it once was. And the trees, those great towering guardians of the forest, seem to loom over the settlement with a greater presence, their twisted branches casting long, cold shadows that feel like watching eyes. You walk through the settlement one evening, and it's hard to shake the feeling that something is wrong. The fire that once roared brightly in the center of camp now flickers feebly. The laughter that once echoed around the hearth has faded, replaced by uneasy silence. Even the crew, usually quick to joke and spar with each other, move quietly, their eyes darting nervously toward the forest. The settlement, for all its strength and defiance, feels fragile. It feels like a house built on sand, one strong gust of wind away from falling apart. One day, as you venture into the woods with a small hunting party, the weight of the silence in the forest presses in on you. The trees, normally full of life and movement, seem to hold their breath. The wind has died down, and there are no birds, no insects. The woods are unnervingly still. The air is thick, heavy, with an unseen presence. Every step you take seems louder than the last, each footfall echoing in the quiet, as though the forest is listening. You stop, instinctively glancing around, and that's when you see it, movement in the trees. At first, it's just a flicker, a shadow darting between the trunks. But then it's there again, clearer this time, a figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching you. The figure is tall, cloaked in shadow, its features indistinct. It stands motionless, staring into the clearing where you stand. For a moment, time seems to stop, and you feel as if you are frozen, caught in some kind of trance. The figure does not move. It simply watches. Your heart races, and you motion for the others to move back slowly, but no one speaks. No one dares to make a sound. The figure does not react. It does not come closer, nor does it retreat. It simply stands there like a sentinel. And then, as you blink, it is gone, vanished into the shadows of the trees. The tension in the group is palpable as you make your way back to the settlement. The figure, once so distinct in the silence of the forest, lingers in your mind. You share your sighting with Leaf, but there is no comfort in his response. The land is not ours to control, he says, his voice quiet, almost resigned. We cannot force it to yield, nor can we ignore it. Whatever this land is, it's not a place that can be tamed. His words ring in your mind, and they feel like the truth. As the days go by, the sense of being watched grows stronger. The figure, though never seen again, is not forgotten. The forest seems to hold a deeper mystery now, and every rustle in the trees, every distant sound, feels like it is calling to the Vikings, testing their resolve. The land does not welcome them, and that reality becomes clearer with each passing day. The Vikings have faced challenges before, storms, battles, starvation, but they've always been able to overcome them with strength, with resolve. But this is different. The land is not something they can simply fight, and no amount of steel or iron can bend the will of a world so ancient and alive. The strange figure in the woods, the strange chanting that once filled the air, the symbols etched into the stones, they are all signs of something greater than the Vikings, something beyond their comprehension. The natives, though more present now, seem to understand this in a way the Vikings cannot. They are not as quick to speak of it, but there is a quiet knowledge in their eyes when they look at the Vikings. They have lived here, coexisted with the land for generations. They know its rhythms, its secrets, its dangers. The Vikings are newcomers in this world, and though they have carved out a place for themselves, they are not masters of it. They are merely passing through, like all who have tried before. Leaf's thoughts are weighed down with the growing burden of leadership. He has always been a man of action, a man who leads with courage and certainty. But now, as the fog grows thicker, the land more mysterious, even he is beginning to feel the pull of uncertainty. His resolve has not faltered in the face of adversity, but the land seems to be testing him in ways he cannot control. The question has shifted. How long can the Vikings remain in Vinland? How long before the land reclaims what it has offered, before it drives them away? The fog rolls in once again, thicker than ever. It hovers over the settlement, silent and oppressive, as if it is waiting. And as the figures in the trees watch silently, the Vikings stand on the precipice of a decision. Will they stay and face what the land demands of them? Or will they leave, returning to the world they know, before the land swallows them whole? The choice is no longer simple. The land has made its demands clear. Now the Vikings must decide: fight to survive in a world they cannot control, or leave Vinland and never look back. The fog lingers longer than ever before, a thick, suffocating presence that seems to wrap around the settlement, turning the world outside into a shadowy, indistinct blur. The air is damp, heavy with the weight of something unspoken, as though the land itself is holding its breath, waiting for the Vikings to make a choice. The crew has grown quieter, more restless. The fire that once burned brightly in the center of the settlement now flickers weakly, casting long, shifting shadows that seem to reach for the darkness at the edge of camp. The trees, so familiar and imposing, feel less like guardians and more like silent observers. The Vikings, with their strength and resolve, are now questioning everything they thought they knew. Leif Erikson gathers the crew together, as he has so many times before, but this time, the usual strength in his voice is tempered with something else, something akin to weariness. He looks out at the group, the men and women who have followed him on this journey, and the weight of their uncertainty hangs in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. There is no easy answer now, no battle to fight, no enemy to face. This is something different. The land itself has become the adversary, and it does not yield to force or will. We cannot ignore what is happening, Leif says, his voice steady but heavy. The land speaks to us, whether we understand its language or not. It has been here long before us, and it will remain long after we are gone. We have carved out a place here, but it is not our place to command. We must respect the land, or we will be forced to leave. There is a heavy silence that follows his words, and for the first time since the Vikings set foot in Vinland, it feels as if the weight of their actions has caught up with them. The uncertainty in the air is palpable. Some of the crew still hold on to the idea that they can fight through this, that they can simply overpower the land, but even they cannot deny the strange, growing pull of the forest, the figure in the trees, the eerie chanting that haunts their dreams. Something has changed. Something beyond their comprehension has been awakened. The question is no longer about survival. It is about respect, about understanding the land that has taken root beneath their feet and in their hearts. The Vikings may be powerful warriors, skilled in battle and conquest, but they are not gods. And Vinland is not a place to be conquered. It is a living, breathing world. And if the Vikings are to survive here, they must learn to live with it, not against it. That evening, as the fog rolls in once again, you find yourself standing by the edge of the settlement, looking out toward the dense woods. The air feels thick, pressing against your chest, and the sound of the wind through the trees carries an unfamiliar resonance. It is almost as if the forest is alive with voices, whispers you can't quite understand, but feel in your bones. It's as though the land itself is breathing, waiting for something. The figure that had appeared in the woods before is still in your mind. You wonder if it's watching again, hidden just beyond the trees, waiting for the Vikings to make their choice. The strange markings on the stones, the symbols etched into the trees, the murmurs in the mist, all of it points to the same conclusion. Vinland is not a place for conquest. It is a place to be understood, a place to be respected. And if the Vikings cannot understand it, they will be driven away. You step away from the edge of the settlement and make your way back toward the fire. Leif and the crew are still discussing their options, their voices quiet, their faces grave. There is no easy decision now. The question of whether to stay or leave has become a matter of survival, but also of spirit. What kind of life can be made in Vinland? Can the Vikings ever truly coexist with the land, or are they doomed to be forever at odds with it? Days pass and the uncertainty only grows. The settlement, which had once felt like a home, now feels like an island in a sea of unknowns. The crew continues to work, continues to build, but there is a hesitation in their movements. They are no longer building a future in Vinland. They are simply surviving, one day at a time. There are still those among the Vikings who cling to the idea of returning to Greenland, of abandoning Vinland and the mysterious forces that inhabit it. But the majority, though uncertain, are resolved to stay. They cannot leave. They have come too far, faced too much, to simply turn back now. The land, with all its power and mystery, will not be easily conquered. But the Vikings are a stubborn people, and they are not ones to leave without a fight. The question now is how to fight, not with swords and shields, but with respect, understanding, and patience. As the seasons change and the fog continues to roll in with increasing frequency, the Vikings face a new kind of challenge. They will have to learn to live in Vinland, not as conquerors, but as part of it. They will have to become part of the land's rhythm, listen to its whispers, understand its power. And if they cannot do that, they will have no place here. The choices that lie ahead are not clear, but one thing is certain. Vinland is not the land the Vikings thought it would be. It is a world unto itself, full of ancient power, and the Vikings must decide whether they can live in harmony with it or be swallowed whole by it. The seasons shift, and the first chill of autumn begins to settle in the air. The once lush land of Vinland, which seemed to teem with life just a few months ago, now feels like an alien place. The trees stand tall, their leaves turning from green to the amber and gold of fall, but the air has grown heavier, the land less welcoming. The fog, though not as frequent, still lingers on the edges of the settlement, and the ever-present whispering of the wind through the trees carries with it an unsettling promise, one that the Vikings cannot ignore. The crew has settled into a quiet rhythm, but the fear of the unknown still simmers just beneath the surface. Despite their outward bravado, the tension within the settlement is palpable. The idea of staying here, living in harmony with the land, seems increasingly difficult. The land, once viewed as an opportunity to claim, to build upon, now feels like something alive, something older than any Viking civilization, something that has no use for human ambition. The longer the Vikings stay, the more they feel the weight of their intrusion. Leif Erikson, ever the leader, has become a more solitary figure. His decisions, once firm and decisive, now come with hesitation. He spends long hours by the edge of the settlement, staring into the vastness of the forest, as if searching for answers that he cannot find. You notice the exhaustion in his face, the weariness that has settled into his bones. The weight of leadership is heavier now, not just because of the responsibilities to his people, but because the uncertainty about Vinland's future is a burden no leader should bear alone. Leif's mind is no longer just on survival, it's on whether or not the Vikings can truly thrive here. Or if they are, as some suspect, living on borrowed time. The crew, too, grows quieter, and the uncertainty that has followed them since the mysterious figure in the forest only deepens. The figures they have seen in the trees, always at the edge of vision, are never far from their minds. The animals that once roamed freely have moved further into the wilderness, and the strange signs, symbols etched into trees, whispers on the wind, still haunt their days and nights. It is as if the land itself is marking them, reminding them that they are not welcome. You find yourself in a similar state of mind. Though you try to continue as you always have, the sense of unease lingers. There are nights when you cannot sleep, when the whispers of the forest seem to call to you, to beckon you deeper into the woods. There are times when you swear you see the figure again, standing just at the edge of the settlement, watching silently from the trees. The land, with its beauty and danger, has begun to feel like a living thing, one that is slowly wrapping itself around the Vikings' hearts, pulling them deeper into its web. One evening, as you walk the perimeter of the settlement, you encounter a small group of crew members gathered around a fire. Their faces are drawn, their expressions tense. One of the men, a young warrior who had once been so full of life, looks at you and shakes his head. "It's no use," he mutters, his voice quiet but full of frustration. "We've done everything we can. This place, it doesn't want us here. It's trying to drive us out." The words hang in the air like a dark omen. You know the man speaks from the fear that has slowly crept into everyone's heart. The land, for all its promises of bounty and adventure, is becoming a prison. No matter how much the Vikings build, how hard they work, they cannot shake the feeling that they are trespassers in a world that has no intention of letting them stay. Leaf calls another meeting, and the crew gathers under the shadow of the trees. The fire flickers weakly in the center of the group, casting long dancing shadows across their faces. Leif stands before them, his shoulders heavy, his posture weary, but there is still strength in his eyes. "We came to this land with hopes of building something new," he says, his voice quiet but resolute. "But we are not the first to try, and we may not be the last. This land is older than anything we know, and it has its own power. We must decide now as a people whether we will continue to fight it or learn to live with it." The crew listens, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. Some nod in agreement, others remain silent, unsure of what to believe. The decision is not easy. The Vikings are warriors at heart, used to facing challenges head-on, used to conquering the unknown. But the land they now find themselves in cannot be fought in the same way. It is a place of power, of ancient forces that cannot be defeated with steel alone. Leif's words hang in the air, and the silence that follows is deafening. No one speaks for a long time, the weight of the decision too great to ignore. The land has shown them its power, its will, and it is clear now that survival here will not be about strength alone. It will be about respect, about learning to live in harmony with something older than themselves. But how? How does one live in harmony with a land that resists them at every turn? How do you coexist with forces you cannot understand, forces that seem to be testing you, pushing you away, and calling you back into the wilderness? As the meeting ends and the crew begins to disperse, the uncertainty lingers in your mind. The question that has been haunting you for so long, how long can the Vikings remain in Vinland, has no answer. You wonder, too, if the Vikings have the strength to adapt to this new world. Can they learn to respect it without being driven away? Or will the land continue to push them to their limits until they are forced to leave? The fog that rolls in from the forest seems thicker now, heavier than it has been before. And as you look out at the settlement, the familiar structures and faces, you can't shake the feeling that it is all temporary, that this land will never truly accept the Vikings, and that the cost of staying here will be far greater than anything they faced before. Vinland is a place of promises, but also a place of trials. The question is no longer about whether the Vikings can survive. It's about whether they can survive in a world that does not need them and may never want them. The days blur together as autumn deepens into a chill that clings to the bones of the settlement. The once hopeful energy that marked the Vikings' arrival in Vinland now feels like a distant memory. In its place is a quiet resignation, a sense that the land, with all its beauty and danger, has begun to take its toll. The fog is more frequent now, creeping in like a second skin, muffling the sounds of the forest and making the settlement feel isolated, disconnected from the world outside. The crew is tired, the exhaustion settling deep into their muscles, into their hearts. They work, yes, but the fire of purpose that once fueled them seems dimmer now. No one speaks much of the land's resistance, the figures that watch them from the forest, or the strange whispers in the wind. The tension has shifted from fear to something more introspective, more subtle. The Vikings are no longer fighting against an enemy. They are fighting against themselves, against the growing sense that they do not belong in Vinland, no matter how hard they try to claim it. Leif Erikson, ever the steadfast leader, has become more reclusive. He still directs the crew with his usual strength, but his gaze often drifts toward the forest, and when he speaks of the future, his words are tinged with uncertainty. The weight of the land's silent resistance seems to have worn him down, and the leadership that once appeared effortless is now a burden he carries alone. The conversations between the crew have changed. The talk around the fire is no longer about conquering this land or how they'll grow their settlement. It's about what happens next. Some wonder aloud if it's time to leave. Others hope against hope that things will get better, but none of them know. The future of the settlement seems as murky as the fog that rolls over the land. You stand at the edge of the forest again, the same place where you felt that strange presence before. The trees loom ahead, their trunks thick and dark, their branches tangled like the threads of fate. The silence of the woods is almost overwhelming, and the familiar chill in the air seems to wrap around you like a cloak. There are no figures in the trees now, no shadows that you can see. The forest is still, but there is something in the air that stirs the hairs on the back of your neck, an unspoken tension that hangs between the trees. You wonder, for the first time, if the land has simply grown tired of the Vikings. They came here seeking a new life, seeking opportunity. But opportunity, you realize, is not something that can be claimed by force. The Vikings arrived with their swords, their ambition, their dreams of a new world. But the world of Vinland is not a world that yields to dreams. It is a world of power, of forces older than time itself, forces that cannot be tamed by steel or fire. It is a place that has endured long before the Vikings set foot on its shores, and will continue to endure long after they are gone. The realization hits you like a wave. The land is not something to be conquered. It is something to be understood, to be respected. The native peoples knew this. They did not come to Vinland to conquer it. They came to live with it, to survive alongside it. Perhaps the Vikings, with all their strength and pride, are the ones who have misunderstood. They cannot claim this land. It will never be theirs in the way they imagine. It will never yield to their will. As you turn back toward the settlement, a new sense of purpose begins to form. It is not about conquering Vinland or forcing it to accept the Vikings. It is about survival, about learning how to live here without pushing the land to the breaking point. The native peoples have understood this for generations. They are part of the land, not separate from it. Perhaps it is time for the Vikings to learn the same lesson, to stop trying to force their will upon the land, and instead learn to coexist with it. The next day, Leif calls for a meeting with the crew, and you gather together in the center of the settlement. The fire is smaller now, but its light still flickers. The crew is quiet, their faces drawn, their eyes tired. No one speaks right away, but the weight of the decision hangs over them like a storm cloud. Leif stands before them, his posture not as firm as it once was, but still resolute. "We have come to a point where we must make a decision," he begins, his voice calm, though his eyes show the strain. "We cannot continue on as we have. The land will not yield to us the way we hoped. It is not a land for conquest. It is a land for living, for learning, for understanding. We must decide if we can stay, and if we do, we must learn to respect this world, not as invaders, but as part of it." His words hang in the air, and the silence stretches out. For the first time, it feels like the Vikings are facing something that they cannot simply fight their way through. They are not conquerors here, not rulers of this new land. They are visitors. And they must decide if they are willing to adapt to this new reality, to live with the land and its mysteries, or if they will leave and return to the world they know. The crew looks at each other, their eyes full of uncertainty. There is no easy answer. The land has tested them, and now they must decide if they are strong enough to live in a world that will not bend to their will. Some are ready to stay, to learn, to change. Others are tired, exhausted by the unrelenting challenges, and long for the familiar comforts of home. Leif's eyes scan the group, and he sighs deeply. "We have come so far, but I will not lead us into ruin. If we stay, we must adapt. We must learn from the land, from the native peoples, and from each other. We must accept that we are not masters of this place, but part of it." The decision, in many ways, is already made. The crew knows that they cannot continue to fight the land. But there is still doubt, still hesitation. The future of Vinland remains uncertain, and the road ahead is full of challenges the Vikings have never faced before. But for now, there is a glimmer of hope, a quiet understanding that survival is possible, not by force, but by respect. The Vikings may never fully conquer Vinland, but they may learn to live in it, to become a part of its story, rather than trying to rewrite it. As the meeting ends and the crew disperses, you feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air. The fog has lifted, but the questions remain. Can the Vikings truly coexist with this land? Can they learn to live with respect? Or will they be driven away by forces they cannot understand? The land waits as always, patient and ancient. And for the first time, the Vikings know that they must do the same. Winter's grip slowly begins to tighten once again. The land, which in summer seemed to offer an endless promise of bounty, now feels harsher, more indifferent. The trees stand bare, their limbs like skeletal arms reaching toward the gray sky. while the cold wind sweeps across the settlement, cutting through every crack and crevice. The Vikings, though weary, continue their work, but there is a marked shift in their efforts. They are not just building homes or planting crops anymore. They are building a new relationship with the land, one that they hope will allow them to survive, to learn, to adapt. The crew has begun to adapt to the rhythms of the land, though the transition is not easy. Each day is a struggle, not just against the elements, but against the sense of uncertainty that still lingers. The strange occurrences have not ceased, but the crew has learned to accept them, at least for now. The figures in the woods, the whispering winds, and the feeling of being watched have become part of the background of life in Vinland. The crew goes about their tasks in a quiet, almost resigned way, and the sound of axes chopping wood, hammers building, and feet trudging through the snow fills the air. But there is no real peace, no calm. The land has not accepted the Vikings fully, and they know it. The native peoples continue their visits, but they too seem more reserved, more cautious. The once open exchanges of food and knowledge have become fewer, replaced with silence and cautious nods. There is an unspoken agreement between the two groups, one that has grown into a tenuous truce. But even that is fragile. The Vikings, in their pride, are not used to being treated with such distance, and the natives, in their quiet wisdom, are not quick to trust. As winter deepens, you spend more time with the land, venturing out into the woods, not to conquer it, but to understand it. You find yourself drawn to the quiet corners of the forest, where the trees grow thick and the snow lies undisturbed. There are moments when you catch glimpses of animals, deer, wolves, even a lone bear, but they are distant, avoiding you as if they know the land's true rhythms better than the Vikings ever will. The land speaks to you in ways that words cannot capture. The patterns of the snow, the rustle of the wind, the way the trees bend and sway. There is an energy to it all, a silent power that runs through the earth and into the sky. You cannot control it, you cannot conquer it, but you are part of it. For the first time, you understand that survival here is not just about fighting the land. It's about becoming a part of it, respecting its power, and learning to live within its constraints. The Vikings, for all their strength and pride, are still visitors here. And until they learn to acknowledge that, they will never truly thrive. The crew's work becomes more focused on learning than building. They begin to trade more knowledge with the native peoples, asking them to show them how to forage, how to trap, how to move through the forest without disturbing it. There are no grand promises of wealth or land. There are only the quiet steps of survival. It is a humble existence, one that the Vikings, so used to victory and conquest, find difficult to accept. But the alternative, the thought of leaving, has become unbearable. There is something about Vinland that has taken root in their hearts. It is not an easy place to live, but is a place where they might truly find a new life if they can learn to live with it, not against it. Leif Erikson has changed too. His leadership, once defined by a burning ambition to conquer, has softened. He no longer speaks of building an empire or becoming rulers of the land. Instead, his words focus on survival, on coexistence. He walks among the crew more often now, his face etched with the same weariness as the rest. The once indomitable leader, filled with dreams of glory, now seems like a man who has come to terms with the reality of Vinland. It is not a place for conquerors. It is a place for those willing to listen, to learn, to adapt. And while the Vikings have not forgotten their warrior spirit, they are beginning to understand that it will not be enough here. The long winter nights are the hardest. As the fire burns low and the wind howls outside, the crew gathers in silence, each person wrapped in their thoughts. The nights stretch long, and the darkness feels heavier than it did before. There is a quiet tension that lingers in the air, a sense of waiting. The land is not done with the Vikings. It watches them, it tests them, and it challenges them. The crew knows this now. But in the silence of the long nights, there is a small hope, a flicker of something that has begun to grow in their hearts. Maybe they are not meant to conquer this land. Maybe they are meant to learn from it, to respect it, and to become part of it in a way that they never expected. The land is ancient, and the native peoples who have lived here for generations know its secrets. The Vikings, with their swords and shields, came with pride and ambition. But now they must survive with humility, adapting to a world that does not care for their titles or their victories. One evening, as you walk along the edge of the settlement, the fog is not as thick as it once was. The air is clearer, the sky a soft, pale blue. There is no figure standing at the edge of the trees, no whispering voices in the wind. It feels different. For the first time since you arrived in Vinland, there is a sense of peace, a quiet, tentative peace that comes not from victory, but from understanding. Perhaps this is the future of the Vikings in Vinland, not conquest, but coexistence, not dominance, but respect. The land will never be tamed, but it can be lived with. And if the Vikings can learn to do that, they may yet carve out a place for themselves here, not as rulers of the land, but as part of it. The settlement is small, humble, but it is a beginning. And that, perhaps, is all that the Vikings need. The deep winter has passed, and with it, the suffocating quiet that had descended upon the settlement lifts like a veil. As the ice melts and the land stirs to life once more, there is a subtle but undeniable change in the air. The Vikings, who had once viewed Vinland as a wild frontier to be conquered, now seem to breathe more easily. The land, though still formidable, does not seem as hostile. The fog that had wrapped itself around the settlement, suffocating it with uncertainty, has finally lifted, leaving behind a clearer sense of purpose. The settlement, once barely holding on, now feels like a place that belongs to the Vikings, just as it has always belonged to the land. The crew works with renewed vigor, but there is no longer the frantic energy of a people scrambling to survive. Instead, there is a quiet confidence in their movements. The land, which once seemed to resist every effort, now seems to offer something in return. The crops, though still small, are beginning to thrive. The animals are returning to the forest, and there are signs of life in the rivers. The balance between the Vikings and the land, though still fragile, is beginning to form. You notice the change most in Leif Erikson. The once brash, determined leader now walks with a steadier, more reflective pace. The weight of command still rests on his shoulders, but the sense of urgency that had defined his leadership is gone. He no longer speaks of grand ambitions or conquests. Instead, he speaks of living in harmony with the land, of learning from those who have been here long before the Vikings arrived. His leadership is no longer about pushing forward with force. It is about guiding the Vikings to adapt, to listen, to understand. As spring begins to unfold, you find yourself spending more time in the forest. The once daunting expanse of trees now feels less alien, more familiar. The land that had once felt like an impenetrable barrier now feels like an open canvas, full of potential. The rhythm of the forest is no longer something to be feared. It is something to be embraced. You learn its subtle cues, the way the trees sway in the wind, the way the soil feels beneath your feet, the direction of the river. It is a world that requires patience, not force. You move through it with more ease now, less like a stranger and more like a part of the landscape itself. The native peoples, too, seem to sense the shift. They come more frequently now, but their visits are not as brief or as guarded as they once were. The exchanges between the Vikings and the natives have become more fluid, less tense. The language barrier, though still present, no longer feels as insurmountable. The Vikings have learned much from the natives, not just about the land, but about the way they live with it. There is no dominance in their relationship. Instead, it is one of mutual respect. The Vikings have learned to forage, to hunt with greater patience, to move through the woods without disturbing its fragile balance. In return, the native peoples share their knowledge of the land, its rhythms, its seasons, and the ancient ways that have allowed them to live in harmony with it for generations. There is still a deep respect between the two groups, but there is no longer the suspicion or fear that once existed. The settlement has become a place where both groups can live side by side, each learning from the other. It is not a perfect peace. There are still tensions, still moments of misunderstanding, but it is enough to sustain them. The land, with all its power and mystery, has become a place where the Vikings can find a new future. And the native peoples, who have long called Vinland home, have found new allies in the Vikings, ones who are beginning to understand the true nature of this land. The change in the settlement is reflected in the daily lives of the crew. There is less talk of leaving, of returning to Greenland. The idea of Vinland as a place to conquer has faded. Instead, the Vikings now speak of building a new kind of settlement, one that is not just about physical structures, but about understanding the land and living with it, not against it. The once proud warriors who had come here seeking glory now seek something different, a life of balance and respect. As summer arrives, the once barren fields are now full of crops. The trees are heavy with fruit, and the forest is alive with the sounds of wildlife. The settlement, small but growing, is a place where the Vikings have found a new kind of peace, a peace that is not born of conquest, but of coexistence. The fires that burn in the center of the settlement now feel warmer, more comforting. The crew gathers around them, not just to eat and work, but to share stories, to laugh, to live. The air, once thick with fear and uncertainty, now feels lighter, filled with the sound of voices and conversation. There is still uncertainty, of course. The Vikings have not forgotten the dangers of this land, nor the forces that seem to watch them from the woods. The strange figure, the whispers in the trees, still linger in their minds, but they no longer rule their every thought. The Vikings have learned, if not to tame the land, then to respect it. They have learned that survival here is not about fighting the land's power, but about understanding it, living with it, becoming a part of it. As the summer stretches on, you walk through the settlement, your eyes scanning the familiar faces of the crew. They are tired, yes, but they are not broken. There is something in their eyes now that was not there when they first arrived in Vinland. Something that speaks of resilience, of acceptance, and of the quiet strength that has come from learning to live with the land rather than against it. The figure in the trees has not been seen again, and though the forest still feels alive with ancient power, the Vikings no longer fear it. They have come to understand that they are part of its story, just as the land is part of theirs. Leif Erikson stands beside you, looking out over the settlement. The look in his eyes has changed. There is no longer the fierce ambition to conquer, but a quiet pride. "We are home," he says softly, almost to himself. "In a way, this land has become ours, not because we forced it, but because we learned to live with it." And for the first time, you truly believe him. Vinland is not the world the Vikings dreamed of, but it is a world where they can survive, thrive, and perhaps even find peace. It is a world where they are no longer conquerors, but part of something much greater, a living, breathing world that will continue long after they are gone. As the seasons roll forward, the life of the settlement gradually shifts from survival to something more akin to harmony. The fog, though still a frequent visitor during the early mornings and evenings, no longer feels like a harbinger of doom. It has become part of the rhythm of Vinland, a natural element that the Vikings have learned to expect to live with. The wind is no longer just a force that batters their homes, but something that brings the scent of the forest, the promise of change, and the rhythm of nature. They have learned to read the signs, the way the air shifts before a storm, the subtle changes in the sky before the first frost. The land, though still wild, has revealed its patterns, its secrets, and the Vikings, despite their initial struggles, are learning to live by them. Leif Erikson is a different man than he was when he first stepped onto the shores of Vinland. The fire in his eyes, once driven by the ambition of conquest, now burns with a quieter intensity. His leadership has softened, not because he is any less determined, but because he has come to understand the weight of the land's power. He has learned, perhaps more than anyone, that Vinland does not yield to force. It yields to respect. He spends less time overseeing the settlement's building and more time walking among the crew, speaking with them, listening to their concerns, and guiding them to a deeper understanding of the land. The crew, too, has changed. The uncertainty and fear that once hung over them have faded. There is still an edge of caution, a healthy respect for the land's power, but there is also a growing sense of pride in what they have accomplished. They are no longer the ragtag group of warriors who landed on the shores of an unknown world. They are settlers now, people who have learned not just how to survive in Vinland, but how to thrive. The settlement is small but growing, its walls stronger, its fields more fertile. The houses are sturdier, the smoke from the fires rising from chimneys instead of open flames. The crew laughs more often around the fire now, telling stories of their struggles, of the figures they saw in the trees, of the eerie chanting that once filled the air, and of the changes they've made to this land. But even as they build, they are mindful of the land's power. They do not take more than they need, and they know that their presence here is a gift, not a right. The native peoples, who have been a part of Vinland far longer than the Vikings, still offer their knowledge, but now the exchanges are more balanced. The Vikings have stopped seeing the natives as something to conquer or challenge. They are their equals, their teachers, and their guides through a world that is as wild and mysterious to them as it has been to the Vikings. The people of Vinland, the land itself, are no longer seen as obstacles to overcome. They are part of the story now, woven together in a delicate, tenuous coexistence. The figure in the forest, the one that had haunted the Vikings' nightmares and lingered in their thoughts, is no longer seen. The shadows in the trees, once so ominous, now seem less threatening. There is a quiet understanding between the two peoples. The land is not a thing to fight against. It is a force to be respected, to be learned from. And perhaps that is the key to living in Vinland, understanding that the land is not something to possess. It is something to coexist with. And so, life continues. The rhythm of the seasons dictates the flow of life in the settlement. The Vikings have learned how to farm this strange soil, how to hunt the elusive animals of the woods, and how to gather the herbs and plants that sustain them. They have learned to read the signs of the changing weather, to watch for the subtle hints in the land, and to adapt accordingly. The land, for its part, seems to allow them to settle, but only if they show the same respect it demands of all things. It is not a place for domination, for brute force. It is a place for those who understand the balance of nature, who can listen to the land and live in harmony with it. The settlement grows, and though the Vikings are far from thriving in the way they had once imagined, there is a quiet pride in their progress. They have made a home in a place that, at first, seemed to reject them. They have adapted to Vinland, and in doing so, they have learned that true strength lies not in conquering the land, but in becoming part of it. One crisp evening, as the sky is painted with the last hues of a fading sunset, you stand on the edge of the settlement, looking out at the vast expanse of forest that stretches beyond. The wind whispers through the trees, carrying with it the sound of something distant, ancient. The world feels still, but in that stillness, there is a deep, unspoken understanding between the land and those who have chosen to live on it. The land does not belong to the Vikings, and it never will. But the Vikings have found their place here, just as the native peoples did long before them. They are part of the land now, part of the story of Vinland. Leif Erikson joins you at the edge, standing silently beside you, his eyes fixed on the same horizon. His voice is quiet when he speaks, almost as if he is speaking to himself. "I did not come here to conquer," he says, his tone reflective, "but to build, to create something new. I thought that meant conquering the land, forcing it to give us what we need. But now I see that the land will not be forced. It will give to those who listen, to those who respect its power." There is a peace in his words, one that resonates deeply. The Vikings have come to understand the true meaning of survival in Vinland. It is not about domination. It is about balance, respect, and listening to the land. The figure in the forest, the strange forces that once seemed to challenge them, no longer haunt their thoughts. Instead, they have learned that the land will give what is needed, but only to those who are willing to live in harmony with it. As the days pass, the settlement grows stronger, more secure. The Vikings have found their place in this wild world, not as conquerors, but as part of it. And in doing so, they have become more than they were before. They are no longer simply survivors. They are part of the land's story, and it is a story that will continue long after they are gone. As the first snows of winter begin to fall once more, a sense of quiet fulfillment settles over the settlement. The Vikings, who once arrived in Vinland with ambition and dreams of conquest, have transformed. Their hands, which were once eager to build empires and take what they wanted from the land, now build homes and cultivate the earth with patience and humility. The land, which once seemed so unyielding, has begun to yield its gifts, but only in return for respect. The settlement, though still small, feels solid, a place of quiet resilience and steady growth. You walk through the settlement, the crunch of fresh snow beneath your boots the only sound. The houses are sturdy now, the fires warm and bright within. The crops, though not as abundant as in the warmer months, have produced enough to carry the Vikings through another winter. There is a peace in the air that had been missing when they first arrived, a peace that comes not from victory, but from understanding. The land has not been conquered, it has been accepted, and in turn, it has allowed the Vikings to find a place within it. Leif Erikson walks beside you, his eyes scanning the settlement with a sense of quiet pride. There is no longer a need to prove anything. The days of ambition-driven conquest are behind him. He looks different now, older, perhaps, but more at peace. "We have built something here," he says, his voice calm, almost reverent. "Not a kingdom, not an empire, but a life that we can call our own." His words hang in the air, heavy with meaning. The Vikings have come a long way from the warriors who first arrived, full of pride and intent on claiming a land that was never truly theirs. Now they have learned that survival is not about taking. It's about living in harmony, about learning from the land that offers its bounty, but only to those who respect it. The Vikings have found their place in Vinland, not as conquerors, but as part of the land's story. They are no longer outsiders. They are woven into the fabric of this world, a part of the rhythms of nature that they once tried so hard to resist. The wind picks up, the chill of winter deepening, but there is something calming about it now. It's not a harbinger of doom or danger. It's simply part of the land, part of the cycle that the Vikings have come to understand. They have learned to read the signs, to follow the rhythms of the seasons, and to listen to the land's quiet voice. And in doing so, they have learned that the land is not an enemy to be defeated, but a partner to be respected. As the fire burns in the center of the settlement that evening, you look around at the faces of your fellow Vikings. They are different now, tired, yes, but no longer broken. There is laughter around the fire, stories of the past, and hopes for the future shared among the crew. The Vikings have found their way, and in doing so, they have found each other. The fears and doubts that once gripped them have been replaced by a quiet sense of pride, and they know now that they have a place in Vinland, not because they fought for it, but because they learned to live with it. Leif stands up and looks around at the gathered crew, his voice carrying through the winter air. "We have come far," he says, his eyes filled with the quiet wisdom of experience, "and we will continue to build. Not just homes, not just fields, but lives, lives that will endure. Not as masters of this land, but as part of it. We will live with it, and it will live with us." The crew nods in silent agreement, their faces filled with understanding. There is no more talk of leaving, no more yearning for what lay beyond the horizon. This is their world now, and they have learned that the true strength lies not in conquering, but in understanding and respecting the land that sustains them. They have found peace, not by overpowering the land, but by learning to live alongside it. As the night deepens and the fire crackles, you step back from the group, looking out into the forest beyond the settlement. The trees, now bare and standing tall against the winter sky, no longer feel like distant sentinels watching from the shadows. They feel like part of the world you now belong to. The figure in the forest that once haunted your dreams is gone. There are no more whispers, no more unsettling murmurs in the wind. There is only the quiet of the forest, the rustling of the trees, and the gentle hum of life that pulses through this land, as steady and eternal as the passing seasons. For the first time, you understand. Vinland is not a place to be conquered. It is a place to be understood, to be respected. The Vikings, with all their strength and pride, have learned that lesson the hard way. But in the end, they have found a place in this world, not as invaders, not as conquerors, but as part of the story that this land will continue to tell long after they are gone. The fire crackles one last time before the embers burn low, and the crew begins to settle into the quiet of the night. You look out at the settlement, the homes nestled against the trees, the snow softly falling, and you realize that this is home. It is a humble home, one built not on the dreams of conquest, but on the quiet understanding of what it means to live in harmony with the land. and for the first time, you feel at peace. End of script. Sweet dreams.